from calendars, timekeeping, and enduring myths and legends, to systems of monarchy, bureaucratic governance, and comfortable urban architecture, the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia left a dazzling legacy. The people here produced enough food to sustain tens of thousands of residents in villages and cities. To date, archaeologists have uncovered over 6,000 urban mound sites, known as tell. These mounds suggest that the region was once filled with marshes and lush grasslands, supporting a population that may have reached millions. Time flows on, and the wheel of fortune turns. The fertile lands that once hosted city-states now lie as barren, desolate desert. The golden sands of Mesopotamia bury the remnants of ancient city walls, temples, and palaces. From a high vantage point, one can see the horizon dotted with large mounds formed by ancient ruins. These mounds might contain the remains of a crumbling tower, or a few fragments of ancient city walls, their mud bricks peeling off like scales scattered in the sand. The primary reason for these structures' decline lies in their material, fragile mud bricks. Over time, the lack of maintenance allowed the wind and sand to erode them. Despite this vulnerability, some ancient constructions remain awe-inspiring even by modern standards. For example, the Temple of Ur was nearly 100 meters tall, equivalent to a 30-story building, constructed entirely from mud bricks. Only a fraction of these sites have been excavated, leaving the possibility of even more extraordinary cultural treasures waiting to be discovered. Archaeologists have carefully restored some of these ruins to approximate their original appearance. However, Mesopotamian ruins are not as immediately impressive as the grand monuments of other ancient cultures, such as the Egyptian pyramids. Instead, they stand as poignant memorials to the long-lost glory of an ancient world, slowly and inexorably disappearing into the earth that once nurtured them. It is easy to imagine that, for the desert nomads who later roamed these dry plains with their herds, the ancient crumbling towers were seen as the earthly abodes of pagan gods. Biblical prophets repeatedly declared these lands to be the source of all worldly evil and the lair of demons. But before we get too far ahead, let's journey back in time for an overview of ancient Mesopotamian history. Then we will take a close look at the mythology of this region, which is both fascinating and peculiar in equal measure. These tales, of course, come from the clay tablets, inscribed in the language of the gods, cuneiform. To date, hundreds of thousands of these tablets have been found, but only a fraction have been deciphered. In the arid, rain-scarce region of Western Asia, characterized primarily by mountains, plateaus, and deserts, there exists a uniquely fertile land. The Euphrates and Tigris rivers flow gently through this area. Each spring, these rivers flood due to rainfall and the melting of snow from the Zagros Mountains, submerging the southern plains. After thousands of years of sediment deposition, this land eventually became suitable for farming once the floods could no longer inundate it. Consequently, since ancient times, humans have inhabited and cultivated this ancient land. The ancient Greeks referred to this region as Mesopotamia, meaning land between rivers. Today, it is commonly known as the Mesopotamian Plain, geographically located in modern-day Iraq. To its east lies the Iranian Plateau, its west borders the Arabian Desert and Syrian Steppe, its north approaches the Armenian Highlands, and its south meets the Persian Gulf. Mesopotamia is divided into northern and southern parts, with the northern region known as Assyria and the southern region as Babylonia. Babylonia itself is further divided into two areas, Akkad in the north and Sumer in the south. The fertile land of Mesopotamia is recognized as the earliest region in the world to develop a civilized society. Its history predates that of Egypt, and its achievements are equally remarkable. It produced the world's oldest scripts, cities, and civilizations, profoundly influencing surrounding regions such as Elam, Phoenicia, Canaan, Judea, the Hittites, and Greece along the Mediterranean coast. Consequently, it made immeasurable contributions to the development of world history. French scholar Jean Bottero once remarked with admiration, "All aspects of our culture were shaped by Mesopotamian civilization." However, the fertile land, particularly southern Babylonia, attracted numerous invaders, mainly nomadic peoples, who repeatedly seized control of this territory. The list of conquerors is long. The Amorites, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Elamites, Medes, Persians, Macedonians, Parthians, Sasanians, Arabs, and more. Warfare and strife were constant in this tumultuous land, where various peoples rose and fell, staging cycles of prosperity and decline. Remarkably, after their conquests, the invaders were ultimately assimilated by Mesopotamian civilization, although they inevitably left traces of their own cultural identities. Despite enduring catastrophic upheavals, the ancient Mesopotamian civilization was preserved and passed down. What we refer to as Babylon today, in the narrow sense, encompasses two periods: the Old Babylonian Kingdom and the Neo-Babylonian Kingdom, separated by the rule of the Assyrian Empire. However, Babylonian civilization was, in fact, created collectively by many peoples, and its origins can be traced back over 4 millennia to the early stages of human civilization. It represents an uninterrupted continuum of cultural development. The origins of Babylonian civilization. Approximately 6 millennia ago, human civilization began to develop in a crescent-shaped region. The earliest known civilization was the Ubaid culture of 4300 BCE, representing the indigenous culture of prehistoric Mesopotamia. At this time, writing had not yet been invented, and myths were largely oral traditions. Around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians entered southern Mesopotamia. They brought with them a more advanced civilization, quickly assimilating the indigenous peoples and creating a new Mesopotamian civilization. From 2900 BCE onwards, Mesopotamian history entered the early dynastic period, marked by the rise, competition, and decline of city-states. The early phase of this period, up to 2750 BCE, is known as the Flood era in Sumerian mythology. The Great Flood story was first recorded on clay tablets in the Epic of the Flood. Archaeological findings of sediment layers from this time corroborate the epic's narrative. The Sumerians established the earliest known urban civilization in Mesopotamia and the world. They achieved astonishing accomplishments in agriculture, art, architecture, social organization, religious thought, and education. Even today, Sumerian contributions to human civilization are evident in modern life. For example, dividing an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds, a year into 12 months, and a week into 7 days, dividing a circle into 360 degrees, and even certain superstitions, such as associating a black cat crossing one's path with bad luck, all trace their origins to Sumerian culture. The Sumerians also invented the world's earliest known writing system and established the first schools in history. These schools became powerful tools for spreading their civilization. The Sumerians left behind an abundance of written records, particularly king lists, myths, and epics, compiled by various city-states. Many myths and legends of the Babylonian period originated in the Sumerian era, later translated into Akkadian, and elaborated upon. One example is the Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest known epic, which survives to this day. The Sumerian mythological system was already well developed. Generally speaking, each city had its own patron deity. The three most important gods were An, the sky god, Enlil, the wind god, and Enki, the god of wisdom and water. They were the patron deities of the cities of Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu, respectively, with An serving as the king of the gods. The sun god Utu and the moon god Nanna, also known as Suin, and later Sin in Akkadian, were also widely worshipped. As the status of the city-states shifted over time, the positions of the gods within the pantheon fluctuated as well, with An, Enlil, and Enki each taking turns as the chief deity. The goddess Inana, who presided over love, fertility, and victory, was the most important female deity in Sumerian mythology. Her status was unrivaled. She symbolized love and beauty and represented fertility. Without her, nothing would grow or thrive. It was she who, through cunning, intoxicated Enki, the god of wisdom and water, and seized various elements of civilization from him to gift to humanity, enabling people to emerge from ignorance and primitiveness. One of her most famous myths is Inanna's descent to the underworld, in which she ventures into the underworld to challenge her sister Ereshkigal for dominion over the subterranean realm. Unfortunately, she is defeated and dies. Later, with the intervention of Enki, she returns to the living world, but only on the condition that a substitute takes her place. She chooses her husband, Dumuzi, as the replacement. Eventually, she has a change of heart and arranges for Dumuzi to alternate between the underworld and the living world every 6 months, thereby creating the cycle of seasons. This myth was later adopted by the Babylonians and reimagined as the story of Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess of love, descending into the underworld. Compared to fertile Babylonia, the northern Akkadian region of Mesopotamia was slower to reach the threshold of civilization. However, during the early dynastic period, the Akkadians gradually adopted Sumerian culture, religion, and customs. In 2347 BCE, Sargon of Akkad proclaimed himself king and led his army on campaigns across the region, conquering city-states such as Uruk, Ur, and Lagash, uniting Babylonia under a single Akkadian kingdom. This marked the first time Mesopotamia came under a unified rule. The Akkadian pantheon was originally simple, and early worship seemed centered on 3 celestial deities: the moon, the sun, and Venus. After assimilating the more complex Sumerian theological system, the Akkadians retained their reverence for these 3 celestial bodies while incorporating most Sumerian gods into their own pantheon. The gods were renamed in Akkadian, but their status and functions largely remained unchanged. An became Anu, Enki was renamed Ea, and Enlil's name underwent minimal alteration. The sun god became Shamash, the moon god was Sin, and the goddess Inanna became Ishtar. At the time, the city of Ur was one of the most important cities, and its patron deity, the moon god Sin, rose to prominence as a chief deity. Sargon declared himself king of the universe and offered one of his daughters as a bride to the moon god. In reality, she served as a priestess in the moon god's temple, a tradition dating back to the early dynastic period. Sargon also claimed that despite his humble origins, his father was a farmer, and he had worked as a gardener, the moon god's daughter, the love goddess Ishtar, fell in love with him while he was a gardener, leading to his rise as a king. This underscores the extraordinary allure and power of the goddess Ishtar, explaining why later kings often attributed their coronations and military successes to her favor. Despite Sargon's grand claims, the foundation of Akkadian rule was unstable. Rebellions frequently erupted in various city-states, and the northern nomadic tribes posed a persistent threat to the kingdom. In 2191 BCE, nomadic Gutians from Persia invaded Babylonia, heralding the end of the Akkadian Empire, the last glory of Sumer, the third dynasty of Ur. The Gutian rule lasted about a century, during which the conquerors adopted Sumerian religion. Various city-states began to revive, with Lagash emerging as the most powerful, reportedly controlling Nippur and Uruk. Eventually, the people of Uruk regained strength and overthrew the Gutians. However, as the proverb goes, while the mantis stalks the cicada, the oriole lies in wait. Uruk attempted to mediate a conflict between Ur and Lagash, but was defeated by Ur's king, Ur-Nammu, who founded the third dynasty of Ur. The second dynasty existed during the early dynastic period. The third dynasty of Ur, also known as the Sumerian Renaissance, marked the zenith of Sumerian civilization. It was during this time that the world's first legal code, the Code of Ur-Nammu, was created. Religion continued to revolve around the moon, god Sin, as the chief deity. The deification of kings intensified, with the king performing as a deity in annual New Year ceremonies and priestesses acting as goddesses. During these rituals, the king received symbols of authority from the priestess and married her in a sacred union to pray for agricultural abundance. This sacred marriage ceremony often involved banquets and festivities. However, the prosperity was short-lived. By the reign of the fifth king, Ibbi-Sin, approximately 2029 to 2006 BCE, the kingdom began to decline. In 2006 BCE, the Amorites invaded Ur from the northwest, while the Elamites attacked from the southeast, capturing Ibbi-Sin and marking the end of the third dynasty of Ur. The Elamites, who had destroyed Ur, were later driven back to the Zagros Mountains by forces from the city of Isin. The Amorites gradually settled in Mesopotamia, adopting the local culture and establishing several states, such as Larsa in the south and Eshnunna in the middle Tigris region. They engaged in prolonged wars for supremacy with other independent kingdoms such as Mari and Assyria. During a time of rivalry among various powers in Mesopotamia, the Babylonian kingdom quietly rose to prominence. The city of Babylon, located on the Middle Euphrates, was a crucial trade hub and had already become an important city during the third dynasty of Ur. Around 1894 BCE, Sumu Abum, an Amorite leader, established the Old Babylonian Kingdom. When Hammurabi, 1792 to 1750 BCE, ascended the throne, Babylon was still subordinate to Assyria and Larsa. However, in 1763 BCE, Babylon began expanding. Hammurabi adopted a strategy of defeating opponents one by one, ultimately conquering the states of Isin, Uruk, Larsa, and Mari. By 1758 BCE, he had unified all of Mesopotamia, except for the northern regions of Assyria and Eshnunna. The Babylonians benefited greatly from the Sumerians in all aspects, particularly in mythology. The Babylonian pantheon largely followed the Sumerian Akkadian system. The Babylonians continuously copied Sumerian texts, often appending Akkadian translations, and they also compiled new Sumerian works. However, the establishment of a unified kingdom led to significant changes in the divine hierarchy. It was not that the old gods were entirely overthrown. Anu, the sky god, Ea, the water god, and Enlil, the wind god, remained primary deities. The moon god Sin, the sun god Shamash, and the love goddess Ishtar also continued to be revered. Nevertheless, with Babylon becoming the kingdom's capital, Marduk, Babylon's patron deity, replaced Anu as the supreme god to symbolize the unity of the kingdom. This period saw the creation of many hymns praising Marduk and celebrating royal achievements. The clay tablet Enuma Elish, When on High, named after the poem's opening words, recounts the Babylonian creation myth. The most significant part of the epic describes a dramatic battle between the mother of creation, Tiamat, and Marduk, the chief deity. Before creation, the universe was dark and void, consisting only of the sea. Within this emptiness, immense transformations were quietly brewing. A salty sea named Tiamat and a fresh or sweet water source named Apsu merged, giving rise to several gods. Anshar and Kishar, in turn, birthed deities such as Anu, the sky god, and Antu, the rain god, marking the emergence of the first generations of gods. As the number of gods increased, Tiamat and Apsu felt their power diminishing. Apsu resolved to eliminate the younger gods, despite Tiamat's disapproval. Apsu proceeded with his plan, but his scheme was discovered. Enki tricked and killed Apsu, establishing himself as the leader of the gods and building a palace on Apsu's body. Seeking revenge for his father, Apsu's son challenged the gods, while Tiamat, in her fury, transformed into a dragon and joined the fray. The gods were overwhelmed until Marduk, a new generation warrior god and son of Ea, volunteered to lead them. Marduk defeated Tiamat and her monstrous army in a decisive battle. He split Tiamat's body in half, using it to create heaven and earth. He then killed Chingu, one of Tiamat's rebel gods, and fashioned humanity from his blood, assigning humans the duty of serving the gods. In doing so, Marduk established the Babylonian kingdom, becoming the earthly king, the heavenly ruler, and the king of all gods. This myth is one of the most representative works of Babylonian literature. It reflects the Babylonians' concern with creation and human origins, as well as their reverence for nature. Each spring, during the fourth night of the New Year festival, this creation myth was recited. However, rather than merely narrating the story of creation, the epic primarily glorifies Marduk's achievements, illustrating the unification and growing power of the Babylonian kingdom, the transition from polytheism to a more centralized monotheistic system, the societal shift from matriarchy to patriarchy, and the evolution from a primitive to a slave society. After Hammurabi's death, the old Babylonian kingdom began to decline. Internal class conflicts arose, and neighboring states grew stronger. Around 1595 BCE, the powerful Hittites from Anatolia captured Babylon, marking the end of the old Babylonian kingdom. Subsequently, the Cassites from the Zagros Mountains entered Babylonia and established the Cassite dynasty of Babylon circa 1530 to 1155 BCE. During the Cassite period, the kingdom was relatively peaceful, with few wars. For the first time, rulers adopted the title King of Babylonia, indicating the further decline of the city-state system and the strengthening of royal power in building a unified state. To enhance the legitimacy of their rule, the Cassite dynasty promoted the Babylonian pantheon throughout the kingdom. According to legend, King Agum II rebuilt the statue of Marduk, elevating him to the status of the supreme god in Mesopotamia. Under royal influence, Cassite nobles quickly adopted Babylonian culture. Royal inscriptions were written in Sumerian or Akkadian, and the names of kings and the architecture of palaces adhered to Babylonian styles. Several historic cities and temples were restored, and Babylonian culture continued to flourish. Literary activities during this time reflected a retrogressive tendency, emphasizing the preservation and development of Sumerian traditions. This marked the third literary golden age of Mesopotamia, and the second and final flourishing period of Babylonian literature. Unfortunately, the Cassite dynasty was surrounded by powerful neighbors, including Assyria, the Hittites, and Elam. Shifts in power led to fluctuating relationships between the Cassites and these states. Around 1157 BCE, the Elamites captured the last Cassite king, bringing the dynasty to an end. After the fall of the Cassite dynasty, Babylonia saw the rise of several regional dynasties, among which Nebuchadnezzar I was particularly notable. He led a campaign into Elam to reclaim the stolen statue of Marduk. During a period of political fragmentation, large numbers of Arameans entered Mesopotamia in the 11th century BCE, eventually establishing their own states by the mid-8th century BCE. In 729 BCE, Assyria conquered Babylon, incorporating it into the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians were a warlike people from ancient Western Asia, who lived in the Assyrian highlands along the upper Tigris River. From the 13th to the 7th century BCE, they dominated Western Asia, leaving a legacy of fear and awe among the nations they encountered. Toward the end of Sumerian rule, a branch of Semitic people arrived in the Assyrian highlands. The highlands, characterized by mountainous terrain, bordered the Syrian plains to the west and the Mesopotamian plains to the south. Rainfall was limited, leading to sparse vegetation. In the river valleys of the Tigris, annual floods made agriculture possible, but the valley was relatively narrow, with arable land covering no more than 1,200 square kilometers. The fertility of the land and irrigation conditions were also inferior to the southern plains. During years of drought, the land became desolate, making survival difficult. These harsh conditions contrasted sharply with the prosperity of neighboring peoples, stimulating the Assyrians' desire to acquire wealth. This drive could only be satisfied through conquest and plunder, making the Assyrians extremely warlike. Each successful raid further fueled their ambition, instilling in them a deep faith in military power and transforming the state into a vast war machine. It is no surprise that the chief deity of this warlike people was a god of war. Ashur, the war god, was the king of the Assyrian pantheon, equivalent to Enlil in Sumerian mythology and Marduk in Babylonian mythology. Ashur was also the patron god of the old capital, Assur, sharing its name with the deity, differentiated here by spelling, and the new capital, Nineveh. Ashur's consort was the goddess Ishtar, reflecting the influence of Babylonian mythology on Assyria, as Ashur's original consort in Assyrian mythology was Semiramis. It seems the Assyrians sought to divorce Ishtar, the goddess of love, from her original shepherd husband, Dumuzi, and marry her to the fierce Ashur. Many aspects of Assyrian culture were built on the foundations of Sumerian and Old Babylonian traditions. Cuneiform writing was introduced from Sumer, and Assyrian religion was heavily influenced by Sumerian beliefs. The names of gods, their deeds, and temple architecture were derived from Sumer. The Assyrians also directly absorbed Sumerian and Babylonian achievements in literature, art, and science, though with a distinctly Assyrian emphasis on practicality and a warrior spirit. In Assyrian mythology, even Ishtar, the goddess of love, often donned armor and joined battles. One myth recounts the story of the amorous goddess helping Assyrian king Ashurbanipal defeat the Elamite king. Before his campaign, the king visited Ishtar's temple to pray. The goddess reassured him, "I am a merciful goddess. My mercy is as high as the arms you raise in prayer, as abundant as the tears in your eyes. Do not fear. I will not abandon those who worship me. I will ensure your invincibility." The following day, Ishtar appeared on the battlefield fully armed, leading the Assyrian army to a decisive victory over the Elamites, and even capturing the Elamite king, Tumen. The Assyrians began their territorial expansion in the 19th century BCE. Transforming from an underdeveloped small tribe into a vast empire, the Assyrians rose and fell 3 times, sweeping across the Mesopotamian plains, razing Babylon, and extending their territory to the Mediterranean coast. Perhaps this remarkable success was indeed due to the favor of the war god. However, prolonged warfare and intensifying internal conflicts among the ruling elite eventually led to Assyria's decline in the 7th century BCE. Surrounding nations and peoples who had never fully submitted to Assyrian rule seized the opportunity to rise. In 605 BCE, the Babylonian army led by Chaldean prince Nebuchadnezzar II decisively defeated the powerful Egyptian-Assyrian alliance at the Battle of Carchemish. This victory marked the end of the Assyrian Empire. The Chaldean dynasty of the Neo-Babylonian Empire inherited much of the former Assyrian territory, including Babylonia, Syria, Palestine, and Phoenicia. In 604 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar II ascended the throne. To secure his rear flank, he married a Median princess, Semiramis, stabilizing his alliances. In 597 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar II marched into Palestine, installing a puppet king over Judah. In 587 BCE, he invaded Palestine again, capturing Jerusalem the following year and deporting most of the Hebrews to Babylon, an event known in history as the Babylonian Captivity. During their time in Babylon, the Hebrews absorbed and adapted numerous Babylonian myths, recording them in Jewish scripture. Biblical scholars have identified connections between Babylonian mythology and stories in the Book of Genesis, such as the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the Great Flood, Noah's Ark, and the Tower of Babel. These connections have profoundly influenced subsequent cultural and religious traditions. Nebuchadnezzar II was an accomplished ruler under whose reign commerce and industry thrived, and the kingdom grew remarkably strong. After consolidating Babylon's power, he turned his attention to expanding and beautifying the city. Determined to showcase his grandeur and glory, Nebuchadnezzar sought to transform Babylon into a magnificent and impregnable city, surpassing the splendor of Hammurabi's Babylon and the Assyrian city of Nineveh. Thus, Babylon entered its second golden age. The most famous architectural achievements of this period, according to legend, include the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, though recent archaeological evidence suggests they may have been in Nineveh instead, and the infamous Tower of Babel, mentioned in the Bible, as well as the processional way leading to the Temple of Marduk. However, Babylon itself was a marvel. The city was square-shaped, covering approximately 500 acres. It had 8 city gates, each named after a deity, with the northwest Ishtar Gate being the most spectacular and best preserved to this day. The Ishtar Gate stood at the forefront of a plaza leading to the Tower of Babel. The walls on both sides of the plaza were 6.83 meters tall and adorned with 60 glazed tile reliefs of lions on each side, representing the embodiment of the goddess Ishtar. These high walls connected seamlessly with the gate, forming a wide pathway to the Tower of Babel. Both kings and commoners would enter the plaza, pass through the Ishtar Gate, and finally reach the main temple. The surviving sections of the Ishtar Gate are approximately 15 meters tall, but originally it was crowned with 2 massive towers. These towers were decorated with reliefs of sacred beasts from Babylonian mythology and religion, such as the Bull of Enlil, the Wind God, and the Mushusu dragon representing Marduk. Archaeologists estimate there were as many as 575 reliefs, showcasing a dazzling and awe-inspiring scene in its prime. Within the city, there were 1,179 temples of varying sizes, the most renowned being the Marduk Temple atop the Tower of Babel. As Babylon's chief deity, Marduk's temple surpassed all others. According to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, the temple housed a golden statue of Marduk seated on a golden throne, alongside a large golden table. Together, these used up 800 talents of gold. A talent was an ancient unit of measurement equivalent to 29.68 kilograms. If Herodotus's account is accurate, the statue and its accessories contained a staggering 23.7 tons of gold, a truly astonishing weight. The Neo-Babylonian kingdom's splendor was the last brilliant reflection of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. To the east, the rising Persian Empire posed a serious threat to Babylonia. Declining commerce led to economic difficulties, and discontent among the populace grew, exacerbated by tensions between the priesthood and the royal family. In 562 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar II passed away, and the monarchy gradually weakened. In 556 BCE, Nabonidus was chosen as king. Traditional accounts suggest he implemented religious reforms, replacing Marduk with the moon god Sin as the chief deity, leading to a rift with the priesthood. However, new archaeological evidence indicates Nabonidus sent his daughter to serve as a priestess in Sin's temple, following an ancient Mesopotamian tradition intended to affirm royal legitimacy. He did not conduct religious reforms. This notion was a myth fabricated by Persian conquerors. Regardless, the conflict between the royal family and the priesthood had become irreconcilable. In 539 BCE, Cyrus of Persia led his army to Babylon. Supported by the priesthood from within, he captured the supposedly impregnable city without bloodshed, confirming the adage that fortresses are most easily breached from within. This marked the end of the Neo-Babylonian kingdom. The fall of the Neo-Babylonian kingdom ended the era of independent states and civilizations in Mesopotamia. It became part of larger empires and was increasingly assimilated into other cultures. Previously, Mesopotamian civilization had held a dominant position, influencing neighboring cultures more than it was influenced by them. Afterward, under foreign rule, Mesopotamian civilization interacted more directly with external cultures, particularly those of Persia, Greece, Rome, and the Arabs, enriching and deepening its content and entering a new era of East-West cultural fusion. The Sumerian Creation. In Sumerian imagination, the primordial universe consisted of the extremes of heaven and earth. The myth does not explain how heaven and earth were created. Perhaps they emerged from chaos as twin entities or existed from the beginning of time. At this stage, the universe had no vast oceans, no shining stars, no rising and setting sun, and no alternating day and night, only a misty void. From this void, the great mother goddess emerged, followed by An, the Lord of Heaven. The Sumerians associated An with the rolling thunder in the sky. During storms, as thunder rumbled through the clouds, people envisioned An as a bull roaring above the heavens. Thus, An was depicted as an elder crowned with horns, symbolizing his authority over the celestial realm. However, An largely remained aloof, rarely concerning himself with earthly affairs. Over time, his power diminished, and more active younger deities assumed control of human matters. Kai was also born from the void. Ki was both An's sister and consort, and together they gave rise to the Anunnaki, a pantheon of gods who convened to determine the fate of all things. Among them, the most revered was Enlil, the wind god. Enlil was venerated as the father god of the black-haired Sumerians. He could bring life and creation, yet also destruction. His wrath caused the heavens to tremble and the earth to quake, while his favor brought abundant spring rains and flourishing vegetation. An also united with Namu, the mother goddess of Eridu, to produce Enki, the wisest of the gods. Enki, the god of wisdom and magic, dwelled in the subterranean freshwater abyss, Abzu, from which he released dew to fill rivers and turn Dilmun's salty marshes into fertile land. Some accounts suggest that Enki's father was Enlil, with An as his grandfather. Meanwhile, the great mother goddess birthed numerous other goddesses who governed various aspects of the world's power. Some say it was Enlil who separated heaven and earth, while others claim it was the first act accomplished collectively by the gods after their birth. Whatever the truth, it may not have required much effort from them, as the clay tablets scarcely mention this event. However, the tablets do detail how the gods created the Tigris and Euphrates rivers on earth. They tasked the Igigi, a group of celestial gods, with building levees, digging river channels, and constructing numerous canals for irrigation around the two great rivers, arranging the Sumerian lands in a tidy manner. The Igigi, numbering around 300, were essentially the servants of the great gods, tirelessly laboring to dig canals, build levees, plow fields, and fire bricks year-round. Their relentless toil eventually led them to revolt, threatening to go on strike unless they were granted rest. The Anunnaki gods convened several times to address the grievances, but often responded by reducing the Igigi's leisure time and increasing their workload. Once the major tasks were completed, the Anunnaki gathered again to discuss their next steps. Enlil, speaking on behalf of An, asked the Anunnaki, "Heaven and earth are separated. The two rivers have been defined, and the levees and channels are complete. What is our next plan? What do we create next?" The Anunnaki presented a clay tablet filled with dense writing, which Enlil examined. The proposals could be summarized as follows: increase the number of laborers, build more water management projects, increase material production. Enlil had no objection to the second and third points, but was perplexed by the first. Increase the number of laborers? Do you mean creating more Igigi? He asked. No, this time we plan to create an entirely new form of laborer. We will use clay as the raw material, mixed with divine blood to imbue them with spirit, so they can work like the Igigi but reproduce rapidly. We intend to call them humans, replied two Anunnaki gods. This way, humans can take over the hard labor currently done by the Igigi. The myth does not specify the identities of these two gods, but it is speculated that one was Enki and the other Ninurta, as they are credited with creating humanity in another myth. The two gods elaborated on their plan to Enlil, proposing to create the first humans at the junction of heaven and earth. Two artisan gods would extract their own blood to create the first batch of humans. These humans would then dig earth, fire bricks, build temples for the gods, dig canals, irrigate the land, and farm to provide offerings for the gods. Thus, the gods would no longer need to work themselves, but could still enjoy the fruits of human labor. The gods praised the idea, and Enlil approved. He then asked, "But how do you plan to ensure that the descendants of these humans will continue to perform their tasks as their ancestors did?" The gods conferred briefly and responded, "For that, we will rely on the oversight of Aruru, the great goddess in charge of creation." Ninurta added, "We could also appoint Nisaba, the goddess of wisdom, to guide humans. She could teach them crafts and writing. With advanced knowledge and skills, Sumer's material production will greatly improve." Thus, the artisan gods Lamga used their own blood to create the first pair of humans, named Anulergar and Anilergar. Humanity began to multiply, cultivating the gods' fields, watering their orchards, building temples, and holding regular festivals to offer fruits and grains. The great goddess Aruru, capable of creating anything from clay, devised vast engineering plans, and taught humans skills in agriculture, forestry, animal husbandry, and fishing, as well as the proper rituals for temple worship, so that every wise man and every fool may spring from the earth like barley. Later, the great gods An, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag appointed Nisaba as humanity's special advisor. Originally the goddess of abundant grains, Nisaba became associated with writing, mathematics, architecture, and astronomy, thanks to her teachings. She not only ensured humans were well fed, but also inspired their creativity, making humanity resourceful and inventive. Sumerian lands began to thrive with vitality. After some time, the gods assessed the results and found that humanity had grown significantly in number. However, the rising population created new challenges, including shortages of food and goods. Many people lived by riversides, surviving on fruit, fish, and game, unaware of bread, beer, milk, or cheese, nor the arts of weaving and clothing, leading to a low quality of life. Enlil and Enki decided to provide humans with livestock and grains. Enlil issued an important directive. First, create sheep for humanity, and if conditions permit, cattle can also be given. The pastoral goddess Lahar taught humans how to domesticate goats and sheep, build enclosures, and raise livestock for milk and wool. She also taught the breeding of cattle and the production of cheese from cow's milk. Next, Enlil and Enki tasked the grain goddess Ashnan with providing barley and wheat to humans, teaching them cultivation and selective breeding. To improve yields, Ashnan distributed agricultural tools, leading to significant increases in grain production. Enki and Ninhursag also gave birth to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, who taught humans to brew beer from malted barley, which soon became the most popular beverage in the land. The grain goddess also provided flax and various plants, delegating the weaving goddess to teach humans how to spin and weave fabrics. Humans, no longer naked, began dyeing their clothes in vibrant colors, satisfying their aesthetic desires. Aruru developed the technique of building mud houses, using reeds and grass to insulate the roofs. Later, Ninhursag's son Kabta studied tools like spades and hoes, while his brother Mushdama focused on foundations and construction techniques. These skills were passed on to humans, freeing them from a nomadic existence. Thus, the sun shone brightly over this land, bringing abundant fruits and vegetables, a rich harvest of grains, and flourishing livestock. With increased material production and advancements in construction and craftsmanship, humanity became more vibrant, and their happiness greatly improved. The Sumerian lands experienced a scene of prosperity, vitality, and wealth. The Babylonian Creation. Above, where the world was born, heaven had not yet been named. Below, the firm earth had not been called by name. Only their first father, Apsu, and the mother who bore all, Tiamat. These two waters mingled together. The Babylonian creation myth begins with the story of two distinct deities, Tiamat, the goddess of salt water, and Apsu, the god of fresh water, joining forces to shape the world. This pivotal event unfolded in the dark, silent sea, where the mingling of their waters marked the beginning of creation. The events that followed closely mirrored those in the Sumerian creation myth, though the subsequent developments diverged dramatically. A fierce battle for control of the world ensued between the younger gods and the ancient deities. In this brutal and bloody divine war, Marduk, the god of war, slew Tiamat, the mother of the world, and rose to become the protector and supreme god of Babylon. Fragments of Enuma Elish. The birth of the world and the first divine king. The world lay in a deep slumber. At the dawn of the universe, neither heaven nor earth had taken shape, and only a boundless, chaotic ocean existed. Darkness and water were intertwined, devoid of light or warmth. Time began to flow from this cold, tranquil ocean, silently passing over thousands of years. Initially, the ocean remained eerily still. Over time, through an unknown process, the chaotic waters began to consolidate, though most of these entities quickly vanished without leaving a trace. Only two forces persisted: Apsu, the tranquil but lifeless god of fresh water, and Tiamat, the turbulent yet fertile goddess of salt water, whose body was encased in the vast sea. Her immortality rendered her indifferent to the steady march of time and the rhythmic pulse of its flow. Each god occupied a separate realm, dwelling in isolation within the dark world, seemingly uninterested in cooperation. However, by chance, or perhaps as an inevitability of creation, one day the infinite ocean began to stir. The saltwater depths rose slowly from the abyss, forcefully pressing upward. The dark sea surged and roared, waves crashing violently against the earth like mountains in motion. Amid this apocalyptic tumult, the two streams converged. Apsu's fresh water flowed into the ocean and merged with Tiamat's salt water. From their first union, two deities were born: the god Lahamu and the goddess Lahamu, who formed the silt layers at the ocean's depths. After an indeterminate amount of time, another mingling of the currents birthed Anshar and Kishar, who became the horizon of heaven and earth. At this point, the divine realm experienced accelerated development. Following the initial pangs of creation, the gods' reproduction rate increased significantly. Over time, though faster than the union of Apsu and Tiamat, Anshar, the male god of the horizon, and Kishar, the female god of the earth's edge, also united, giving birth to Anu, the sky god. Anu married Antu, the goddess of rain, and their offspring included Enlil, the wind god, and Ea, the water god, who in turn had many descendants. Anshar and Kishar thus became a pair of ancestral gods, and the earliest generations of divine beings were established in the universe. The divine order and the rise of Anu. As the number of gods grew, so did conflicts and disputes. These ranged from major issues like divine domains to minor quarrels over seating arrangements at banquets. The younger celestial gods and the older sea gods frequently clashed. It became apparent that a leader was needed to mediate disputes among the gods, a king of the gods. But who should it be? By this time, the creators Apsu and Tiamat, exhausted from their long labors, had returned to the abyss to rest. The twin deities of Silt, Lahmu and Lahamu, remained indifferent to worldly matters. Anshar, being the eldest and most respected, was considered a candidate due to his high standing. After a divine assembly and a vote, the gods chose Anshar, not to become king himself, but to evaluate and finalize the list of candidates for the throne. This suggests that at this stage, Babylonian deities favored voting rather than the might makes right ethos that later became prevalent. The exact names on the candidate list remain unknown, but the outcome is clear. After serious deliberation, Anshar selected Anu as the ruler of the gods, citing his status as Anshar's eldest son and their similar temperaments. Following the election, Anu became the king of the gods. He appointed Anshar as his advisor and Ea, the water god, as his herald. Anu then began establishing order in the divine realm. All gods, great and small, were required to obey his commands. To facilitate governance, he took residence in a magnificent heavenly palace, while his herald, Ea, remained on earth. Thus, the first heavenly dynasty was born. The god-king Anu gazed down from his celestial palace upon the world he ruled. Everywhere was shrouded in darkness. Despite the clear division between heaven and earth, the outlines of the plains and mountains remained indistinct in the shadows. This sight deeply troubled him. How are we supposed to accomplish anything in this darkness? For some time, the divine temple of the heavens had turned into a place of complaints. During celestial feasts, gods often lamented the inconveniences of perpetual darkness as they drank. Deities dwelling in rivers and mountains would occasionally send messages, urging Anu to change the status quo and create a world completely different from the era of Apsu. Although Anu occupied the highest position, for a being born in darkness, the concept of light was still unimaginable. He considered consulting Apsu and Tiamat, but the primordial gods, content after laying the foundation of creation and birthing other gods, were resting in the warm, dark abyss. Disturbing their sleep would undoubtedly invite a scolding. Until they awakened, Anu could not rely on their assistance. Disappointed, Anu turned his gaze toward the younger gods. Sin, the eldest son of Enlil, and the goddess Ninlil, caught his attention. Long ago, Enlil had pursued the beautiful Ninlil in a frenzy, leading to an unplanned pregnancy. As punishment, Enlil was banished to the underworld, and Ninlil followed him there, where their son Sin was born. Despite his origins in the underworld, Sin bore no trace of its dark aura. Handsome and luminous, his silver-white skin shimmered faintly in the darkness, resembling pure waves. Enlil had once prophesied that Sin would become the lord of the night sky, illuminating the earth with unparalleled brilliance. Anu decided to make use of this prophecy. After consulting with Enlil, Anu appointed Sin as the guardian of the night sky, and fashioned Sin's lustrous silver hair into rays of light, casting them onto the earth. Thus, for the first time, the world experienced light. The gods praised Anu's wisdom, and he basked in their admiration. Meanwhile, deep in the abyss, Apsu and Tiamat were struggling to sleep. The gods' revelry under the moonlight carried through the waves, piercing the layers of water and disturbing their dreams until they were finally awakened. Could the end of the world have arrived early? Has the earth split open and the sea flooded in? Or has the sky collapsed and the mountains crumbled? Apsu grumbled, irritated by his disrupted rest. No, even such disasters would not cause such a racket. Has something unexpected happened while we were asleep? No, we are the creators of the world. Everything should be under our control. Rest here, I will investigate, Tiamat reassured the agitated Apsu. She emerged from the abyss and looked up at the sky. The light immediately stung her eyes, and the noise unsettled her accustomed quiet. What is this silvery thing? It is formless, yet painful to the eyes. Under its power, the earth begins to take shape, she thought to herself. She hurried back to the depths to consult Lamu and Lahamu for information. I saw a golden palace rising in the air, dazzlingly splendid. Anshar seemed to reside there. Beside him stood a god crowned and majestic, clearly one of my descendants, Tiamat said. But they have caused your father Apsu great distress. Lahmu, my firstborn and most valued among the gods, tell me what has transpired. Thus, Tiamat, and later Apsu, learned of Anu's reforms from Lahmu and Lahamu. Though Apsu was typically calm and even-tempered, he was now seething with anger. Being disturbed from sleep was one issue, but he also felt his authority challenged and his status threatened. Such important changes, yet they did not consult me. They didn't even seek my opinion. Furious, Apsu emerged from the abyss and loudly rebuked Anu, demanding with his grandfatherly authority, that Anu withdraw the light and restore the world to its previous state of chaotic darkness. News of Apsu's decree spread rapidly among the gods, causing a stir throughout the heavens. From celestial palaces to mountain peaks, from homes to marketplaces, gods debated. Should we agree to the primordial god's demands to extinguish the light? But what if we don't? Some senior gods, such as Anu, Anshar, and Ea, frequently met in secret to discuss compromises. Proposals included dividing the day into light and dark, restricting outdoor activities, reducing noise, and using soundproof building materials to appease Apsu. However, gods like Enlil and many younger deities dismissed these ideas. They had never encountered Apsu and felt no obligation to obey him. Moreover, his demands seemed unreasonable. "We need light," they petitioned Anu, urging him to ignore Apsu's request. The dispute dragged on, with neither side yielding. The gods' arguments grew louder and more chaotic, and Anu's repeated orders for calm were ignored. Apsu, waiting in the abyss, grew increasingly enraged when the sky failed to dim and the noise only grew louder. "These insolent descendants! Even Anshar has sided with them," he muttered, pacing furiously. "Creating them was a mistake. If I could do it over, yes, if there were a second chance, I would never make such a foolish error." Having expended much of his strength during the creation of the world, Apsu was no longer as powerful as he once was. He saw the gods' defiance as an affront to his dignity and a direct challenge to his authority. In his weary and irritable state, he became even more entrenched in his resentment. He resolved to eliminate the rebellious gods and sought Tiamat's counsel to plan their annihilation. Tiamat and Apsu, envisioned as the goddess of salt water and the god of the freshwater abyss, loosely followed the Sumerian cosmology, though the subsequent developments diverged significantly. "Are you mad, old man?" "They're our descendants. How could you bear to harm them?" Tiamat retorted. While she also disliked the noise and the light, she couldn't bring herself to destroy her own grandchildren. Softened by these thoughts, she snorted in disapproval, expressing her dissatisfaction with Apsu's plan. The disagreement ended in discord. Without Tiamat's support, Apsu temporarily abandoned his plans for all-out assault, instead opting for a strategy of divide and conquer. He summoned his confidant, Mumu, the god of waves, to devise a plan of action. Directly attacking Anu's palace seemed the easiest option, but it carried high risks. Eliminating other gods first might alert the heavens. Ultimately, they decided to ambush Ea, the god of wisdom, whose cunning and schemes posed the greatest threat. To prevent delays, Apsu planned to visit Ea that very night, under the pretense of hospitality, then collaborate with Mummu to kill the unsuspecting water god, marking the beginning of their campaign. That night, Apsu brought fine wine and delicacies to Ea's home. "What brings the old man here?" Ea wondered as he hosted his guest. "If he's angry, shouldn't he start with Anu? What does this have to do with me?" Despite his suspicions, Ea feigned ignorance and engaged in polite conversation over drinks. During the feast, a servant informed Ea that a loyal minor deity urgently sought an audience, claiming the matter was of life and death importance to the heavens. Ea excused himself to meet the visitor, who revealed that he had overheard Apsu and Mumu's plot. Ea, enraged by Apsu's treachery, prepared to retaliate. However, realizing he lacked the strength to confront Apsu directly, he paused, contemplating a more strategic approach. Ea, being the cunning and wise god, quickly devised a plan. He skillfully wove a sleep spell and cast it on Apsu while he was off guard. Apsu, engrossed in his plot and confident of its success, failed to notice the spell. Gradually, his eyelids grew heavy, and despite his efforts to resist the pull of slumber, he succumbed to the spell's immense power. Apsu, already drained of energy, yawned several times before falling into a deep sleep. Ea wasted no time, chaining Apsu by the neck and binding him beneath a massive stone. With Apsu incapacitated, Ea drew his sword and killed him. Mumu, unaware of the turn of events, led a group of divine followers to attack as planned, but walked straight into Ea's trap. The entire group was captured. Ea strung a rope through Mumu's nose, tying him to a stone pillar for all to see, and killed Mumu's followers. Thus, Apsu, the primordial god of creation, met an untimely death. His body transformed into a pool of pure water. Anu, delighted by the outcome, permitted Ea to build a sacred hall of justice above the pool. The structure and the city surrounding it were named Apsu, and Anu assigned Ea to reside there as a reward for his achievements. With the father of creation dead, the heavenly gods collectively assumed control of the universe. Under Anu's rule, the world grew bright and bustling. The gods divided responsibilities and lived in comfort and contentment. Ea's city of Apsu and its grand and solemn hall of justice became a cherished sanctuary for the gods. Having slain their enemy, Ea gained great prestige among the gods and won the admiration of many goddesses. Before long, he married the goddess Damkina, who bore him a son, Marduk. Meanwhile, Tiamat was in the abyss, wailing and raging in sorrow, pounding her chest and tearing at her hair in grief. "My beloved companion, you created the world and bore countless children, yet now you have fallen victim to the schemes of our descendants. I would rather you had died on the battlefield than endure this dishonorable death. What am I saying? Have I lost my mind? How I regret not agreeing to your plan at the time. If only I had acted with you, they would now be the ones lamenting. Wretched Tiamat, Ea has built his palace on Apsu's body and resides there, gloating. The heavenly gods are celebrating in the skies, feasting and reveling in their victory, humiliating the defeated. But I, Apsu's wife and sister, am I to stand idly by?" At this, Tiamat angrily struck the ground and shouted, "I will have my revenge! I will have my revenge!" "Yes, we must take revenge," agreed Kingu, a sea god who stood beside her, his sharp voice echoing in the abyss. After Apsu and Tiamat had retreated to rest in the depths, they had borne additional gods, some together, others solely by Tiamat. Kingu, Tiamat's firstborn among the sea gods, was the eldest of her independent progeny. For a long time, these sea gods had enjoyed peaceful and abundant lives in the vast and tranquil ocean. However, when Anu was established as king of the gods, the divine center of power shifted from the sea to the heavens, greatly diminishing the status of the sea gods and creating a crisis. In response, the sea gods convened a secret meeting in the depths. Kingu, Tiamat's eldest son, was the first to voice his grievances. "Our lives grow worse by the day. Not only have we lost the glory and authority we once held, but Anu has created light and the four winds. These winds violently disturb the shining surface of the sea, leaving us no peace. Look at everyone's eyes. Lack of sleep has given us all dark circles. For our survival, we must act to punish those heavenly gods who have violated our rights." Hearing Kingu's words, the other gods' anger burned like fire. From all directions came calls. "Yes, we must show them our strength. Let them taste our fury." Others urged, "Find a way to take revenge. Ea murdered our father, Apsu. This debt must be settled once and for all. Apsu was not my father, Kingu declared, though he paused in thought at the mention of the creator's name. After a moment of silence, he added with a cunning expression, "The heavenly gods outnumber us, so we must proceed cautiously. But I have a plan." As he resumed speaking, his tone grew confident. "Listen. Though our mother Tiamat is still in the abyss, mourning and wailing, if we appeal to her grievances and stoke her anger with old and new resentments, she will be driven to fury. Then we can use her power to assemble an army and wipe out the heavenly gods in one fell swoop." Following Kingu's lead, the aggrieved sea gods approached Tiamat in the abyss to advocate for their cause. "Our mother," Kingu began as he entered her salty domain, "when Anu created light, you allowed him to proceed. Now he has created the 4 raging winds, disrupting your waters and your very being. We cannot sleep, yet you remain indifferent. Look at our swollen, sleepless eyes. Clearly, you do not love us, for you ignore these matters and take no action. Are you unaware of how Father was brutally killed by Ea? Do you not regret failing to join Father's plan to destroy the heavenly gods? Why do you not rise up against them? We will fully support you." Though deeply grieved, Tiamat had not yet been blinded by anger. "I regret not acting with him then," she admitted. "But revenge must not be impulsive. Rashness leads to destruction. My son, listen to me. If your father had made a careful plan and gathered sufficient strength, he would not have met such an end. This time, we must plan thoroughly and wait for the right moment to ensure our success." "Wait for the right moment? How long must we wait?" Kingu retorted impatiently. "Mother, as the saying goes, the slayer of one's father cannot share the same sky. Our power is being continually eroded by the heavenly gods. If we do not act now, our fate will only worsen. Stop hesitating and lead us to avenge our great injustice." Tiamat, recalling Apsu's fate, insisted on prudence. "Let us first gather intelligence, recruit allies, and strengthen our forces before making a move. You underestimate our power and overestimate Anu's conniving rabble. Will you do nothing but weep? Where is the might of the mother of all?" Kingu spat angrily and stormed out. Other offspring, seeing Tiamat's hesitation, began to complain, accusing her of heartlessness and indifference to Apsu's death. Kingu issued an ultimatum. "If you refuse to act today, we will take matters into our own hands and march against the heavens." The sea gods elected Kingu as their leader, forming an army to confront Anu and the heavenly gods. Seeing her children so resolute and spurred by the accusations of the older sea gods, Tiamat finally joined the rebellion. Witnessing her enraged offspring and their determination, Tiamat resolved to lead the charge as supreme commander. The sea gods were emboldened by the Mother of the Abyss's support, rallying around her to prepare for their revolt. Tiamat threw herself into the preparations, forging countless weapons and creating 11 fearsome beasts, fire-breathing dragons, grotesque scorpion men, razor-toothed fish men, and ferocious storm giants. These terrifying monsters were crafted from her wrath and venomous hatred, embodying pure nightmare fuel. Tiamat imbued them with immense strength, making them fearless in battle and unyielding in death. Next, she selected a second in command. Following the principle of primogeniture, she appointed Kingu as the supreme general to lead the army against the heavens. As she bestowed the Tablet of Destinies upon him, granting him control over the fate of gods and all creation, Tiamat declared Kingu her second husband, ensuring his name would live forever. In a rallying cry before the assembled army, she proclaimed, "Kingu, lead the gods to war against the heavens. This is your destiny. I have blessed you with spells and granted you the power to summon the divine assembly. You are now my equal, the ultimate commander. Your reign will endure for eternity, and your words shall never fade." She roared, "Let your might conquer the detestable heavenly gods." "Brothers," cried King as he stood before the army, "we once ruled the world, but now our lands are being devoured piece by piece. We were once glorious, yet now we are mocked by the upstart heavenly gods. Can we endure the arrogance and deceit of these wretched scoundrels? Look at them. They used treachery to kill our father, Apsu, and even built their palace upon his body. How can we tolerate such humiliation? The time has come for us to rise and reclaim what is ours. Let us march into the heavens, annihilate the gods, destroy their light and order, and return to the primordial age of darkness and chaos. Brothers, the Mother of the Abyss stands with us. She is also my wife, Tiamat. With her support, victory is ours. Destroy the light, return to chaos, the gods roared in response. March forth, the time to restore our glory has come, Kingu shouted. To the heavens, echoed the gods as the army surged forward. This was to be the decisive battle between darkness and light, chaos and order. Driven by rage and ambition, the army of sea gods led 11 massive monsters to storm the heavens. The clash of swords and shields shook the cosmos, causing mountains to crumble and tidal waves to surge. The heavenly guards stationed on the perimeter, caught unprepared, were so terrified by the overwhelming horde of monstrous creatures that they fled in disarray. In the face of such a grave threat, the heavenly temple's usual atmosphere of joy and tranquility was nowhere to be found. Anu summoned his trusted advisors, including Anshar and Ea, to an emergency military council to discuss how to repel the invaders. Knowing the immense power of the Mother of the Abyss, Anu was deeply uneasy. After a long silence, he turned to Ea and said, Ea, you killed Apsu. Now I entrust you with eliminating Kingu. He leads Tiamat's army at the forefront. If you kill their vanguard, their morale will collapse, and the Mother of the Abyss will lose her strongest ally. Can I refuse such a bitter task as pulling the claws from a she-dragon? Ea responded, Fine. Kingu is no easy opponent, but I am no easy prey either. Seeing Ea's confidence, Anu bestowed the commander's staff upon him and ordered him to lead the defense against Tiamat's army. By this time, Kingu's forces were swiftly advancing on Ea's stronghold, a city built upon Apsu's body. To Tiamat, this city was a symbol of great insult, and she vowed to destroy it. When Kingu's vanguard launched a fierce assault on the city, Ea's guards were prepared. The sound of alarms echoed across the vast waters, and the reverberations from the deep gorges signaled the guards to ready themselves for battle. The vanguard of Kingu's army charged at Apsu's city, shouting battle cries that soon turned into ferocious roars like the raging sea. As they advanced toward the walls, the guards hurled a hailstorm of stones down upon them. Kingu's vanguard struggled through this onslaught, desperately attempting to breach the defenses. The shouts grew louder as both sides engaged in brutal and bloody combat. From a high vantage point, Ea's son Marduk observed the battle. He noticed that the narrow bay leading to Apsu's city, combined with the city's fortifications, forced Kingu's forces into tightly packed formations, making them vulnerable to attack. Recognizing this advantage, Marduk ordered the defenders to advance and counterattack with full force. It was like a storm battering a harbor. Despite the tempest's fury, the ships remained safe within the harbor's protection until the storm subsided. Soon, the attackers began to falter. Their leaders screamed themselves hoarse, issuing impossible commands for their soldiers to withstand the storm of stones and breach the walls. Overwhelmed by the defenders' relentless counterattacks, the invaders tried to retreat. Chaos ensued as panicked soldiers trampled over the fallen to reach their ships, resembling a giant serpent slithering across the water as they fled. The defenders of Apsu's city had won the first battle, and Ea basked in the triumph. The tide turns. Tiamat's counterattack. Days later, the situation took a dramatic turn. Furious at the failure of the initial assault, Tiamat dispatched her army of dragons and personally led the charge. The city of Apsu's defenses were severely tested, as these monstrous creatures knew neither pain nor fear. Their thick, ugly hides repelled even the fiercest attacks, while their venomous breath caused devastating casualties. Reinforcements from Kingu and Tiamat's combined forces continually arrived, and the defenders of Apsu's city began to falter under the relentless assault. Despite its strong defenses, Apsu's city faced dwindling supplies and manpower. Kingu's army encircled the city, leaving Ea with a grim choice: either face them in open battle or surrender within a week or so due to starvation. Ea found himself in a dire predicament. He desperately sought a way out, but refused to abandon his beautiful city and flee. As days passed, the morale of his troops plummeted. Whispers of dissent grew louder as more gods considered surrender. Initially, the complaints were subdued, but soon they became open discussions, leaving Ea deeply troubled. However, as the god of wisdom, Ea decided to use the situation to his advantage. First, he punished a group of cowards and reminded his troops that the worst outcome of standing firm was a heroic death, while surrender would likely lead to being devoured by the dragons. After stabilizing morale, he spread false rumors that Apsu's city gates were on the verge of collapse and that the defenders were in complete disarray. Meanwhile, he set elaborate traps around the city gates, making them impenetrable even to the wind. He then positioned his army behind the traps, waiting for the reckless Kingu to fall into his snare. On the day the traps were set, Ea feigned defeat. Using his illusionary magic, he made it appear as though chaos reigned within Apsu's city. Seeing what they believed to be a golden opportunity, Kingu's forces breached the city gates and surged forward, only to fall into Ea's carefully laid traps. At that moment, Ea's troops launched a decisive counterattack, ready to annihilate the enemy forces in one fell swoop. Ea thought his plan was succeeding, but then cries of despair erupted from his army's rear. A horde of monsters was pouring into the city from behind Apsu, taking advantage of the guards' lack of preparation to launch a devastating assault. Ea's forces were soon surrounded, caught between the main army led by Tiamat's monsters and the vanguard of Kingu. The result was a massacre. Tiamat had anticipated Ea's schemes and divided her forces with Kingu. While Kingu feigned an all-out attack on the city gates with a weaker force, Tiamat led the main army around to attack from the rear. When Kingu's sacrificial vanguard fell into Ea's trap, Ea believed his plan had worked and launched his counterattack. But this left him exposed, and he fell victim to Tiamat's diversion. Despite correctly assessing the situation and recognizing Kingu's cunning and Tiamat's combat power, Ea underestimated Tiamat's meticulous planning. The wise god was outwitted. The ensuing battle could no longer be called a fight. It was a massacre. Apsu's defenders were nearly annihilated, surrounded by an enemy bent on destruction. Realizing there was no hope of rescue and no chance of victory, they chose to die fighting rather than be devoured by Tiamat's monsters. Their battle became a desperate, doomed struggle. Ea exhausted every spell, strategy, and soldier at his disposal to cut a small escape route back to the heavens. He fled with only his wife Damkina, his son Marduk, and a few of his most loyal gods. The once glorious city of Apsu lay shrouded in death. Rivers of blood flowed along its streets, staining its lakes red. The air resounded with crackling flames, groans, and the screams of the dying and wounded. Smoke rose like a specter, lingering over the battlefield and swirling above mangled corpses. Driven by anger and vengeance, Tiamat and Kingu destroyed every structure in sight. The once proud Hall of Justice was reduced to rubble, and Apsu's city became a wasteland of mud and ruins. Above them the sun cast its scorching rays as usual, while ominous clouds hovered over Anu's temple in the heavens. The celestial realm stood on the brink of disaster. The heavens were cloaked in gloom. Anshar and Anu convened the gods, asking who among them would lead an army against the rebels. The gods looked at one another in silence, each afraid to speak. Tiamat was the mother of all gods, a mighty dragon queen. Who could survive her wrath? Who would dare to accept such a suicidal mission? At that moment, Marduk stepped forward. Before this, his wise father Ea had dragged him out of the temple, encouraging him to offer his services to Anshar. Marduk had already been eager for the challenge, and his father's encouragement only emboldened him. Now he volunteered, promising Anshar that he would defeat Tiamat and place his foot on her neck, ensuring she would never threaten the gods again. However, Marduk made a condition. To complete the task swiftly, he required the full support of the gods. Specifically, the gods needed to convene and formally bestow upon him the position and authority of king. "Lord of the gods," Marduk said, "I will fight for your fate and risk my life. Call an assembly of the gods and grant me dominion. In their gathering, I must hold the highest place. What I say will become reality, and my will shall not be overturned." "I will have to think about it," Anu sighed. But given the dire circumstances, there wasn't much to consider. Anu agreed and sent his messenger Kaka to summon all the celestial gods, including Tiamat's firstborn, Lahmu and Lahamu, to discuss the matter. "Alas, how could Tiamat do such a thing? It is truly regrettable," said the great gods, pretending they had only just learned of Tiamat's rebellion. They gathered in Anu's celestial palace, exchanging pleasantries while carefully weighing their words. Despite the war drawing ever closer, Anu hosted a grand feast, ensuring the gods were well fed and drunk on fine wine. As they indulged, their fear faded, and the prospect of leaving the battle to Marduk lifted their spirits. Their praises for him soon filled the hall. "You are the most glorious warrior among the gods," they proclaimed to Marduk. "Your stature is unmatched. Your commands are like Anu's. No, they are even more powerful. Your weapons will forever triumph over your enemies. All creation bows before you. Our honor now rests in your hands." Their flattery poured forth like a torrent. "Then give me your strength," Marduk demanded. Drunk on wine, the gods did not hesitate to offer their powers to Marduk. "Show us your might," the gods exclaimed. Marduk extended his arms and uttered a spell. A sigil appeared in the sky, and with another command, it vanished. The gods marveled at his power. With this display, Marduk solidified his status and departed to confront Tiamat, armed with the weapons bestowed upon him by the gods. His chariot, drawn by the winds of the four directions, carried him forward. In his hands were an iron bow and a sharp sword, and he appeared before Tiamat's army, radiating authority. The final battle. "Stop using your lips to sustain this rebellion," Marduk called out to Tiamat. He accused the mother of the abyss of arrogance and tyranny, chastising her for marrying her own son, Kingu. "Sacred power has left you," he declared. Finally, he challenged her, taunting her to face him in single combat. Enraged by Marduk's taunts, Tiamat lost all reason. She opened her massive jaws to swallow him whole. At that moment, Marduk cast a net of winds around her, ensnaring her completely. As she struggled, violent winds struck her belly, causing her body to swell like a balloon. Marduk seized the opportunity to release a deadly arrow, which tore through her abdomen, pierced her innards, and split her heart. The mother of the abyss fell lifeless, and Marduk, true to his word, placed his foot upon her neck. With Tiamat's death, the rebel army collapsed. The sea gods fled in panic, and Marduk captured Tiamat's forces. He took the Tablet of Destinies from Kingu's chest and fastened it to his own. Using Tiamat's corpse, Marduk created order from chaos. He split her body in two, placing one half in the heavens and the other on the earth, thereby forming the world. To ensure the gods could rest, Marduk sacrificed the traitorous Kingu and used his blood, through Ea's magic, to create humanity. Marduk's victory left the gods awestruck. Standing before him, they cried, "This is our king! Only Marduk can be the king of gods and men. You are the protector of the sacred. Command us as you will." Marduk declared, "The gods dwell in celestial temples, but I wish to build a grand sanctuary on earth. There, I will establish a site for rituals to honor my kingship for all eternity. It will be a place of peace and joy for the gods when they gather. I shall call it Babylon, the gate of the gods." The gods of Mesopotamia were often born from natural forces or represented the personification of cities, yet they were depicted as emotional, individualistic characters. They were considered the earliest ancestors of humanity, with humans originating from the failed rebellion of a god. Like humans, the gods suffered family disputes and generational conflicts. The Babylonian creation myth, Enuma Elish, is one of the most representative works of Babylonian literature, reflecting their concern with creation, the origins of humanity, and the worship of nature. It holds pioneering significance in world literature. Elements such as the Greek myth of chaos, the union of earth and heaven to give birth to gods, and the generational struggles of Uranus, Kronos, and Zeus can all trace their origins back to this story. Similarly, the creation order in the Bible mirrors this myth, first creating heaven and earth, then separating water and land, and finally creating humans. The same theme appears in other Mesopotamian cities' creation myths, especially in one called Theogony of Dunnu. This myth can be traced back at least to the early 20th century BCE and takes place in a small city named Dunnu. According to Theogony of Dunnu, the world and the gods originated as follows. At the beginning of creation, there were only plow and earth. Their union gave rise to sea, who later gave birth to the cattle god. Together, they built the eternal city of Dunnu, where plow settled down. Subsequently, the cattle god secretly united with his mother, Earth, and killed his father, Plow, taking over Dunnu and marrying his sister, Sea, with whom he had the poultry god. The next generation followed the same pattern. The cattle god's son, the poultry god, killed his father and united with his mother, Sea. Later, Sea killed Earth and bore River, a daughter, and the shepherd god, a son, with the poultry god. The shepherd god then killed his father and married River. Thus, generation after generation, a cycle unfolded in which male gods killed their fathers and married their sisters or mothers. Some male gods were named after wandering creatures like poultry or cattle. while their sisters or mothers often symbolized natural features like rivers, trees, or meadows. Though many details remain unclear, such stories may symbolize the changing seasons. Each season kills or replaces the previous one. Eventually, this pattern underwent a significant change. A male god did not kill his father to inherit his domain and authority, but instead imprisoned him. According to this version of the creation myth, each slain deity rests eternally in Dunu, a city cherished by the dead gods. Yet, the precise location of Dunu today remains unknown. Perhaps its existence and prosperity were fleeting, quickly overtaken by more powerful cities, or perhaps it was merely a mythical city, inhabited by deceased gods. This myth reinforces the impression left by Enuma Elish, and similar narratives of generational conflict among the gods. Creation myths often carry strong political undertones. By highlighting the pivotal role of a particular city or deity in the story, these myths elevated the status of that city and its guardian god, or reflected internal struggles and conflicts within society. For instance, Enuma Elish emerged alongside the establishment of the Old Babylonian kingdom's dominance in Mesopotamia. Babylon's city god inevitably rose above other city gods to become the nation's chief deity. Before Marduk, roles as chief deity were held by Anu, Enlil, and Enki. Babylon's unification was achieved through Marduk's victory over Tiamat and his effective policy of reconciliation, which ensured Marduk's perpetual rule over the land after his triumph. An, the ambiguous Lord of Heaven. The name of the god An translates to heaven in Sumerian. He is the divine embodiment of the sky, depicted as a detached elder who grants authority to gods and kings, overseeing the universal laws that determine individual fates. Early Sumerian myths do not specify where An came from or how he became the father of gods. However, later myths describe him as a descendant of the male deity Uras, or the eldest son of the horizon god Anshar and the earth goddess Kishar, making him the grandson of the primordial deities Tiamat and Apsu. In early Sumerian mythology, An's consort was referred to as the goddess Uras, but later accounts often identify the earth goddess Ki as his partner. The Sumerians imagined the heavens as a three-layered dome covering the flat earth, with each layer composed of different gemstones, and represented the highest and outermost celestial dome, above which lay the primordial waters known as Namu. When heaven and earth were separated, and took control of the heavens, creating the world as we know it, he then sent nourishing rains to the earth, enabling vegetation to flourish. The Babylonian Akkadians called the Lord of the Sky Anu and his consort Antu, who might have been a feminine counterpart of Anu. Rain was described as Antu's milk, formed from the clouds. An, or Anu, remains a vague and background figure in ancient mythology, often serving as a passive character. One myth recounts how the mortal king Adapa was summoned to the heavens by Anu after breaking the wing of the south wind. Anu offered Adapa the food and water of immortality, but Adapa refused them because Ea had deceived him, warning that the food and water would bring death. Adapa thus missed his chance for immortality. While Anu felt some regret, he said nothing further. Anu also appears briefly in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the extant Babylonian version of the epic, Anu's daughter Ishtar, equivalent to the Sumerian goddess Inana, is humiliated when her advances toward Gilgamesh are rejected. Enraged, she appeals to her father, Anu, to punish Gilgamesh for his disrespect. Anu, calmly and mildly, suggests that Ishtar should deal with Gilgamesh herself. In response, Ishtar demands that Anu grant her the celestial bull to attack Gilgamesh, promising in return to prepare provisions for 7 years of famine. However, when the bull is slain by Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu, Anu mourns the loss of the mighty beast. He insists that one of the two heroes must die, and Enlil ultimately decrees Enkidu's death, a decision Anu does not oppose. En, the father of many powerful deities, played a foundational role in the earliest divine triad. His most notable offspring were Enlil, the god of wind, and Enki, the god of water and wisdom. Other myths also attribute many children to him, including Utu, the sun god, Adad, the storm god, Nana, the moon god, Nergal, the god of war, Inana, queen of heaven, Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, Bau, the goddess of healing, and Nisaba, the goddess of grain and writing, and also created malevolent beings like the demoness Lamashtu and the stone monster Azag, earning his title as Father of the Gods. However, throughout Mesopotamian history, En received limited worship. Most reverence was directed toward his son Enlil, and, at times, to Enki. In different eras, both Enlil and Enki assumed the role of chief deity and were granted Anutu, or heavenly power, by En. En's primary cult center was the Inana temple in Uruk, but over time he transferred his authority in Uruk to his daughter Inana. Ultimately, En's position was superseded by Enlil, and later by Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. The god Enlil. Enlil, known in Mesopotamian mythology as the god of earth, wind, and storms, also referred to as Elil or Nunamnir, played a crucial role in Sumerian creation myths. He was said to have separated heaven and earth, making the world habitable for humanity. Enlil was a formidable warrior who controlled spring storms and harvests, while also overseeing societal institutions. In his holy city of Nippur, a hymn declared, "Enlil sits on a white high dais. On that majestic high dais, he perfects kingship and laws. The earth gods kneel in awe before him, and the heavenly gods bow low. Without Enlil's approval, no city can be built, no cattle pens or sheepfolds can be constructed, no king can be appointed, and no male or female priest can be chosen by divine signs." Enlil's personality is complex, with a prominent trait being his temperamental and easily angered nature. This is especially evident in the Babylonian flood myth, Atrahasis. Long ago, the senior gods lived leisurely lives, while the younger gods were forced to shoulder all the labor of maintaining heaven and earth, working tirelessly year-round. One day, the younger gods collectively went on strike. To replace them, Enki proposed creating a new workforce, humankind, and received Enlil's approval. These newly created humans were placed on Earth, and initially, they behaved exactly as the gods intended, maintaining the land and offering worship and sacrifices in gratitude for their existence. However, as humans multiplied and their numbers grew, their noise increased to unbearable levels. Enlil, unable to endure the incessant clamor, decided to reduce the population. He sent droughts, plagues, and famines to strike humanity one after another. But each time, Enki secretly warned the humans, telling them how to save themselves. Enlil, baffled, could not understand why his punishment seemed only to enable humans to thrive even more. Finally, he resolved to send a great flood to annihilate humanity, and strictly prohibited any god from warning them. Though Enki disagreed, he had neither the authority nor the power to oppose Enlil's decree. Instead, he issued a warning to a wall of reeds, knowing that Atrahasis was behind it, pondering a dream he recently had. Enki whispered, "Reed house, brick wall. Listen carefully. Reed house, brick wall. Listen, listen. Tear down your house. Build a great boat. Forsake your possessions and load the boat with the seeds of every living creature." Atrahasis obeyed, and 7 days later, a catastrophic flood arrived as promised. His boat floated for a long time on the raging waters until the floodwaters finally receded. Atrahasis immediately went ashore and offered sacrifices to the gods. The aroma of the offerings attracted the gods, who swarmed around like flies. Most of the gods declared that life was better with humans, except for Enlil. Upon realizing that his grand plan had failed again, and that Enki had once more outwitted him, Enlil flew into a rage. How could anyone survive this disaster? Enki admitted that he had secretly conveyed the warning, but he also argued that if humanity were wiped out, the younger gods, accustomed to leisure, would have to resume laboring themselves. Enki proposed a new plan, creating a new generation of humans who would not reproduce excessively and would have shorter lifespans. Enlil agreed. The gods then implemented measures to reshape humanity, ensuring future populations would not grow too dense by introducing mortality, infertility, and daily survival challenges. Another ancient text, the Curse of Agade, also illustrates Enlil's merciless nature. The story recounts how Enlil, displeased with 2 ancient cities, destroyed them with a mere frown, as if slaying mighty bulls. He then bestowed his favor upon King Naram-Sin of Agade, extending his dominion from the fertile plains to the rugged mountains. At that time, the Queen of Heaven, Inana, made her home in Agade. She brought wisdom to the elderly, eloquence to the old men, joy to young women, bravery to young men, and happiness to children. She rejoiced in the city as if building her first home, and refused to rest until its granaries were filled. Under her favor, Agade flourished with tall city walls, bustling harbors, abundant foreign tribute, and warehouses overflowing with grain, livestock, gold, silver, and precious materials like copper, tin, and lapis lazuli. Inanna planned to build a temple in the city. However, for unknown reasons, Enlil suddenly withdrew his favor from Agade. He commanded other gods to abandon the city and cease blessing it. His frown plunged Agade into chaos. Inanna abandoned her sanctuary and fled to her heavenly abode, taking the city's martial strength with her. The war god Ninurta left with his scepter, crown, and throne. The sun god Utu stripped the city of its charm, and the water god Enki withdrew its wisdom. Within days, the gods had forsaken Agade, leaving it like a dying elephant or a gasping dragon. Neighboring cities, like strong bulls, circled the weakened city, eager to strike. King Naram-Sin, disturbed by ominous signs, prayed to Enlil for an explanation of the god's discontent. One night, he dreamt of Agade's bleak future, seeing that Enlil would not allow its glory to endure, foretelling its ruin. Upon waking, he revealed nothing of the dream to anyone. Instead, he donned mourning clothes, veiled his royal chariot, stripped the ceremonial ship of its canopy, and distributed his possessions to others. For 7 years, Naram-Sin engaged in ascetic practices, but he received no signs or omens. Growing increasingly dejected, he offered a child as a sacrifice, but still, no divine response came. He offered a second, but the gods remained silent. Disasters and omens continued to plague his kingdom, and the populace began to scatter. Frustrated by the gods' indifference, Naram-Sin finally assembled an army and marched to Nippur, attacking Enlil's temple, the Akur. His soldiers dismantled the lintels of the Great Hall, smashed the doors of the sanctuary, and looted the treasure trove. While they avoided desecrating the gods themselves, the celestial guardian statues of the temple were burned, and the treasure was carted back to Agade. This act brought no benefit to Naram-Sin and only provoked Enlil's fury. Enlil, enraged in his heavenly palace, deliberated on how to repay the destruction of his beloved temple. Other gods also turned against Naram-Sin, praying to Enlil, "May the city that destroyed your temple suffer the same fate." Enlil unleashed the Gutians upon Agade. These barbaric invaders had the intelligence of humans, but the instincts of dogs and the nature of monkeys. They roamed the plains in packs, pillaging everything in their path. After the Gutians invaded Agade, the city was devastated by widespread famine. Corpses littered the streets and houses, and the entire city turned into a ruin. The pastures that once grew green grass now sprout only mournful reeds. Rivers that once flowed with fresh water now yield water too salty to drink. If anyone chooses to live in that city, they will find no joy in it. If anyone seeks rest there, they will find no comfort. Thus, Agade and the Akkadian Empire came to an end, and Naram-Sin, who had defied the gods, met his doom. The curse of Agade concludes with this reminder. In truth, the historical Naram-Sin was devout toward the gods and did not destroy any temples. He died of natural causes. The kingdom's downfall resulted from his son's incompetence as a ruler, continued wars with the Elamites, Amorites, and invading Gutians, the enormous cost of rebuilding Enlil's temple in Nippur, and a climate crisis that caused a massive famine. These misfortunes compounded, leading to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. The tale of the curse of Agade, passed down for millennia, served as a cautionary story to remind people of the need to revere Enlil and the gods. Enlil's duties were not always limited to managing divine affairs or dispensing wrathful judgments. In his earlier days, before ascending to the role of overseeing the divine council, he was involved in a romantic escapade. He pursued the beautiful goddess Ninlil, but his improper behavior resulted in a judgment from the gods, sentencing him to the underworld as punishment. Ninlil followed him to the underworld, and their son, Inana, the moon god, was born in the netherworld. One myth recounts how Enlil married Ninlil and fathered Inana, the bright, sacred, and solitary traveler of the night sky. However, from birth, Inana was fated to remain in the underworld unless his parents could negotiate his release with the gods. Enlil devised a cunning plan to enable his son to journey through the night sky. Ninlil's mother had warned her not to bathe in the river, cautioning that Enlil might see her and seduce her, leading to an unwanted pregnancy. Ninlil ignored the warning, and sure enough, Enlil was captivated by her youthful beauty as she bathed. From across the river, he called out to her. Ninlil initially refused his advances, citing her youth, her parents' disapproval, and the potential gossip among her friends. Disheartened, Enlil returned home, but Ninlil's image lingered in his mind, leaving him restless. Unable to resist, he ordered his steward, Nusku, to prepare a small boat so he could cross the river and meet Ninlil. Ninlil, having reconsidered, was charmed by the handsome and robust Enlil. When he crossed the river, she accepted his love, and they consummated their union in the boat. Ninlil became pregnant with Inana, the moon god. However, upon returning to his holy city of Nippur, Enlil was accused of violating Ninlil. His failure to formally seek her mother's approval before courting her offended the goddess deeply. The 50 great Anunnaki gods and 7 judges of the underworld found Enlil guilty and expelled him from the city. To serve his sentence, Enlil had to make a long journey to the underworld via the River of Death. Unwilling to be separated from Enlil, Ninlil followed him. At the city gates, Enlil instructed the gatekeeper, "If Ninlil asks where I've gone, do not tell her." When Ninlil arrived, she inquired about Enlil's whereabouts. The gatekeeper replied, "I have never had the honor of speaking with Enlil." Ninlil declared proudly, "I carry Enlil's child. The moon is in my womb." The gatekeeper, recognizing the need to save the unborn moon god from eternal imprisonment in the underworld, proposed fathering a second child with Ninlil to serve as a substitute. Ninlil agreed, unaware that Enlil had disguised himself as the gatekeeper. Thus, she conceived a second child with Enlil, Nergal, destined to remain in the underworld as the king of the dead. Enlil continued his journey, with Ninlil persistently following. A few days later, Enlil reached the base of a mountain, where a river guarded the entrance to the underworld. Again, Enlil instructed the river's guardian not to reveal his whereabouts to Ninlil. When she arrived and asked the guardian, she received a similar response. Once more, the disguised Enlil convinced Ninlil to bear a substitute child. This time, she conceived Ninazu, the god of the underworld. At the final stage of his journey, Enlil disguised himself as the ferryman of the underworld river. Ninlil, mistaking him for the ferryman, bore a third substitute child, Enbilulu, who would become the river god. At each stage of Enlil's descent into the underworld, he and Ninlil conceived another child to serve as a substitute for Nana, allowing the moon god to escape the netherworld. This clever scheme enabled Nana to ascend to the night sky, while his substitutes took his place in the underworld. The moon itself became a representation of Enlil, signifying his ability to return from the underworld and resume his divine rule as Lord of heaven and earth and God of fertility. The story concludes with a hymn praising Enlil. "You are the Lord. You are the great Lord, Lord of the granary. You are the Lord who makes barley sprout. You are the Lord who makes flax grow." Another prominent god in Mesopotamian mythology is Enki, the god of fresh water, wisdom, craftsmanship, and creation. The name Enki likely means Lord of the Earth, as in Sumerian, En signifies a lord or master, a title initially granted to high priests, while Kai may mean earth, or possibly derive from Kig, meaning hill. In Assyrian Babylonian mythology, Enki is known as Ea, and interpretations of the name vary. Some suggest Ea originates from another linguistic source, meaning life, referring to spring water or flowing water. Others propose that Ea, Ea in Sumerian, is short for House of Water, referencing Enki's temple in Eridu. This grand temple, adorned with gold, silver, chalcedony, and lapis lazuli, stood by the riverbank with foundations extending deep into the earth, reaching Enki's domain in the subterranean freshwater sea, the Apsu. The temple was always bustling, resembling the roaring rivers during flood season. Inside, Enki had arranged for musicians and drummers, while the exterior featured vibrant gardens with blooming flowers, lush fruit trees, and flocks of birds and animals. Rivers teeming with carp added to the scene. The temple was imbued with magical powers. Its bricks offered Enki advice, the reed fences mooed like cattle. Its roof beams resembled celestial bulls, and its main gate stood as a roaring lion, exuding the vitality of a bull. A hymn praising Enki recounts the temple's inauguration. To ensure the gods blessed the temple, Enki traveled by flatboat to Nippur, hosting a grand feast for the gods. In preparation for this celebration, Enki slaughtered countless bulls and goats, then ordered the beating of drums to announce his journey to Nippur, where he would receive divine blessings. Fish danced in the waters before him, and the Euphrates swelled as his boat sailed through, the water sounding like a lowing cow. Upon landing in Nippur, Enki visited Enlil's temple and began brewing beer in a large bronze cauldron, laying a feast for Enlil and other gods. He invited An to sit at the head of the table, with Enlil beside him, and great goddesses in prominent seats nearby. Enlil was delighted, and, before all the great heavenly gods, blessed Enki's new temple, saying, "Enki has completed his temple. It rises from the earth like a mountain." Enki's domain lay in the subterranean freshwater sea, the Apsu, constructed atop the body of the primordial god Apsu, whom Enki had slain. The Apsu was regarded as essential to life, as all terrestrial growth depended on the fresh water seeping from it. Mesopotamian civilization relied on an intricate irrigation system designed to cultivate the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Annual spring floods disrupted field boundaries, necessitating a complex system of land measurement. Managing and maintaining the canals required centralized authority to organize large-scale labor. As such, the development of monarchy, laws, and writing systems was closely tied to water and irrigation management. Control over water sources and irrigation meant control over the land, explaining why Enki, as the god overseeing fresh water and irrigation, was highly revered. Initially, Enki might have been the patron deity of Eridu, but later his worship spread throughout Mesopotamia, influencing the Canaanites, Hittites, and Hurrians. Enki's depiction often emphasizes his association with water. In an ancient seal, Enki appears wearing a horned cap and a fringed skirt, with his right arm extended to receive an eagle descending from above. Streams of water flow from his shoulders on either side, one representing the Tigris River and the other the Euphrates. Two nearby trees symbolize man and woman, further affirming his identity as the god of fresh water, life, and creation. Enki's personality is clever and resourceful. In Mesopotamian mythology, he frequently appears, often busy fixing problems caused by other gods, especially Enlil or the goddess Inana. However, his overflowing energy sometimes lands him in trouble. One myth recounts how Enki ordered the sun, god Utu, to fetch fresh spring water from the earth to create Dilmun, a verdant paradise abundant with fruit. Enki, alongside the mother goddess Ninhursag, also known as Ninhursaga, Ninma, or Mami, engaged in a series of unions, becoming the father of several gods and goddesses. Ninhursag, one of Mesopotamia's principal goddesses, alternated roles as Enki's spouse or colleague in various myths, often competing or collaborating with him. In the Sumerian epic Enki and Ninhursag, Enki describes Dilmun as a pure and radiant land. Dilmun is a pure place, Dilmun is a bright place. In Dilmun, the raven does not croak, the lion does not kill, the wolf does not seize lambs, the sick do not cry, nor do the elderly say, "I am old." Enki invited Ninhursag to share this paradise. She agreed, and after their union, Ninhursag bore a daughter, Ninsar, Lady Greenery. When Ninsar grew up, Enki, captivated by her beauty, sought to be with her. Persuaded by his steward Isimu, Enki united with Ninsar, who bore a daughter, Ninkura, Lady of the Mountains. As Ninkura matured, Enki repeated his actions, and she bore Ninima, Lady of the Womb. When Ninima came of age, Enki pursued her as well, resulting in the birth of Utu, the spider goddess and deity of weaving and clothing. Utu, warned by Ninhursag not to yield to Enki unless he brought her 8 irrigated fruits, initially rejected his advances. Enki irrigated a garden, obtained the fruits, and won Utu's favor. However, after their union, Utu cried, and Ninhursag, hearing her distress, removed Enki's seed from Utu and planted it in the ground. From this seed sprang 8 plants. Unaware of their origin, Enki ordered the plants harvested, cleaned, and studied. Finding them fascinating, he consumed them all, which caused him to fall gravely ill. Enraged, Ninhursag vowed never to heal him. The gods, helpless, were at a loss until a clever fox convinced Ninhursag to relent. She agreed, and through her efforts, Enki's illness was transferred to her, leading to the birth of 8 gods corresponding to Enki's afflicted body parts. The Sumerian epic concludes with Ninhursag proclaiming, "Let Abu be king of plants. Let Nintula rule over Magan. Let Ninsitu marry Ninazu. Let Ninkasi be the satisfying beer goddess. Let Nanshe wed Ninda. Let Azimua wed Ningish Zida. Let Ninti be queen of the moon. And let Emshag rule Dilmun." Thanks to Ninhursag's treatment, Enki was finally cured of the strange illness he contracted due to his excessive lust. He then assigned his 8 children various divine roles, or paired them with suitable spouses, thereby resolving his ailment. In another myth, the relationship between Enki and Ninhursag is less intimate and more like that of competitive colleagues. This takes place during the first council of the Sumerian gods, where the Anunnaki decided to create humanity to replace the Igigi gods in their labor. Enlil approved the proposal and delegated a group of major gods to oversee the creation of humankind. However, only Enki and the great goddess Ninhursag, also called Ninma, could work together to create humans. At this time, Enki was still resting in the freshwater depths of the Apsu. His mother, the mother goddess of Eridu, Namu, dove into the depths to wake him up, urging him to rise to the surface and collaborate with Ninhursag in designing a being that could serve the gods. Using his intelligence and the life-giving fresh water he controlled, Enki brought to life the clay in Ninhursag's hands. Ninhursag then directed these clay-born humans to carry baskets of earth, construct canals, and maintain the land. Namu also assigned destinies to each human. The first batch of humans proved efficient and error-free in their tasks, performing well under the gods' direction. Everything ran smoothly, and the gods finally enjoyed leisure, indulging in drinking, festivities, and relaxation. To celebrate this successful creation, Enki hosted a grand feast. During the celebration, the gods praised the achievements of Enki and Ninhursag. Enki and Ninhursag, brimming with pride, shared the details of their creative project. As the drinking continued, some gods began to flatter Enki, saying, "Enki, the all-knowing, who can rival your wisdom or your deeds?" Others started to argue, debating whether Enki or Ninhursag had contributed more. Eventually, some gods incited a challenge between Enki and Ninhursag. Ninhursag declared, "I can create humans myself and determine their fates, whether fortunate or ill." Enki responded, "Whatever kind of human you create, regardless of their fate, I can assign them a suitable place." Ninhursag began crafting her own test humans, perhaps out of a desire to challenge Enki or due to inebriation, or possibly because her skill in assigning human destinies was not as refined as Namu's. The humans she molded exhibited various flaws. The first were unable to extend their arms. Enki appointed this person as a servant to the king, reasoning that their inability to extend their arms made them less likely to steal. The second humans were blind. Enki granted them the gift of music and made them a royal musician. The clay tablet describing the third human is damaged and unclear. The fourth human is unable to control their seed. Enki performed a purification ritual and assigned them to serve the king. The fifth human is a barren woman. Enki placed her in the royal harem to care for children. Ninhursag continued to create humans with various disabilities, and Enki found suitable roles for each one. Finally, Enki proclaimed triumphantly, "For every human you create, I have assigned an appropriate position to ensure they have food to eat. Now it's my turn to challenge you." The humans Enki created were less fortunate. To test Ninhursag's abilities, he first created a woman who suffered from childbirth difficulties. Ninhursag could not alleviate her plight. The second was an elderly man whose organs had failed due to age, leaving him frail and barely able to respond to Ninhursag's questions. Frustrated, Ninhursag admitted she could not improve his condition. Thus, Enki found roles for all the humans Ninhursag created, but the beings Enki created were too frail for Ninhursag to manage. From this moment on, humanity experienced aging, death, and various misfortunes, all stemming from a drunken bet between Enki and Ninhursag. The cultural exchange between the ancient Mesopotamian civilization and neighboring regions led to the stories of its three main gods influencing myths in other parts of the world. For example, the ancient Hittites, who lived in what is now the Anatolian Plateau in Turkey, have a myth about the succession of the gods. Long ago, in primordial times, Alalu was the Lord of Heaven. He sat on the throne, served dutifully by his subordinate Anu, the same Anu from Mesopotamian mythology, and the other gods, who carefully attended to him and poured him wine. However, Alalu's rule lasted only 9 years before the gods revolted. Alalu fled to the depths of the earth, and the gods elevated Anu to take his place. Anu's son, Kumarbi, then served as the new king's chief minister. 9 years later, another rebellion occurred, this time led by Kumarbi. Anu, knowing he was no match for his son, fled. But Kumarbi seized Anu's legs, pulling him down from the heavens and biting off his genitals, swallowing them whole. Kumarbi believed this act secured his dominance and eliminated any threat from Anu or his offspring. However, the dethroned Anu warned him, "Your victory is but an illusion." By swallowing Anu's genitals, Kumarbi had also inadvertently ingested his seed, becoming pregnant with the storm god Teshub, his attendant Tasmisu, and the mighty Tigris River. Some versions claim Kumarbi spat out the seed onto the earth, which gave birth to new gods, while others suggest the divine offspring grew within Kumarbi's body until their appointed time of birth. Either way, Teshub emerged, quickly usurping his father's power to become the new king of the gods. However, Kumarbi did not give up his claim to power. Recognizing he could not defeat Teshub directly, he enlisted the help of Ea, Enki from Mesopotamian mythology, and orchestrated a series of plots to overthrow Teshub. Kumarbi's repeated attempts to attack the throne created instability in the heavens and strained his alliance with Ea. Eventually, Ea intervened as a mediator, allowing Teshub to solidify his reign as king of the gods. The sequence of divine overthrows in the Hittite creation myth later served as the basis for the Greek myth of succession, recounted in Hesiod's Theogony. In Hesiod's poem, Uranus, the sky god, is overthrown and castrated by his son Cronus, mirroring Anu's fate at the hands of Kumarbi. Subsequently, Cronus is overthrown by his son Zeus, just as Kumarbi is deposed by Teshub. Hesiod, a Greek poet from the 7th century BCE, likely inherited the tale through cultural transmission from Anatolia, where the story of Uranus's castration had been brought by people migrating after the Hittite Empire's collapse. Over time, this father-son conflict narrative was incorporated into the official Olympian pantheon. Anu, the Mesopotamian god, bears some similarities to Zeus, the king of the gods in Greek mythology. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Ishtar approaches Anu to complain after being rejected by Gilgamesh, only to be gently reprimanded by him. This parallels a scene in the Iliad, Book 5. Aphrodite, after attempting to rescue her son Aeneas and being wounded by the Greek hero Diomedes, flees back to Mount Olympus. There, she tearfully complains to her mother, Dione, and is gently reprimanded by her father, Zeus. In this myth, Dione functions as a feminine counterpart to Zeus, much like Antu serves as a feminine counterpart to Anu in Mesopotamian mythology. However, in Greek mythology, an original twist is added. During Aphrodite's lament, she is mocked by her colleague Athena. The Mesopotamian myths of the creation of humanity and the flood have also influenced Greek mythology. In one Greek myth, Prometheus and Athena collaborate to create humanity. Prometheus molds human figures out of clay, but these creations lack spirit and crawl like beasts, howling. Athena takes these clay figures and breathes life into them, thus bringing humanity to existence. Prometheus then acts as humanity's protector, teaching them various skills and ensuring their welfare. This draws Zeus's ire, as he views humanity as a threat. In this myth, Athena parallels Ninurta as a creator of humanity, while Prometheus plays the role of the protective and wise god, akin to Enki. Zeus, like Enlil in Mesopotamian myths, opposes humanity and eventually attempts to destroy them by sending a great flood. The Mesopotamian flood myth directly influenced the Greek story of Deucalion's flood, but the Greek version includes elements of moral judgment. In the Greek account, Zeus, disgusted by human wickedness, unleashes a great flood to destroy humanity. However, Deucalion, forewarned by his father Prometheus, builds an ark and fills it with provisions. He and his wife Pyrrha board the ark. Strong winds blow, torrential rains pour, rivers roar into the sea, and water levels rise rapidly, destroying cities and drowning the world, leaving only a few mountain peaks visible. All life seems lost, except for Deucalion and Pyrrha. After 9 days of drifting, the waters recede, and their ark lands on Mount Parnassus, or in some versions, Mount Etna, Mount Athos, or Mount Othrys in Thessaly. Deucalion sends a dove to survey the land before disembarking. Once ashore, Deucalion and Pyrrha offer sacrifices to Zeus, the protector of survivors, and pray at the temple of the Titaness Themis by the river Cephissus. The temple, still wet and covered in seaweed, echoes their humility as they beseech the gods for humanity's rebirth. Zeus hears their prayers from afar and sends Hermes to fulfill their request. Inanna Ishtar. Inanna is one of the most complex goddesses in Mesopotamian mythology, appearing more frequently than any other deity. Her name, translated from Sumerian, roughly means Queen of Heaven. Known in Akkadian as Ishtar, she shares ties with the Syrian goddess Astarte, the Canaanite goddess Ashtoreth, and the Greek Aphrodite. Inanna's principal temple was in the city of Uruk, but over time, local goddesses from other city-states were assimilated into her worship, leading to her encompassing seemingly incompatible traits. Inanna may have originally been an independent city-state deity, who was later described as the daughter of a supreme god. Different cities offered varying accounts of her parentage. Some claimed she was the daughter of the sky god An, others said the moon god Nana, the water god Enki, or the wind god Enlil. These differing accounts reflected the shifting power and status of these deities and their respective city-states over time. Regardless of the version, Inanna was consistently considered the daughter of her city's highest deity. Symbols of Inanna. The planet Venus was associated with the goddess Inanna, and the 8-pointed star became her most common symbol. Her sacred animal was the lion, seen by ancient Mesopotamians as a symbol of power. The association between the goddess and lions dates back to the Sumerian period. evidenced by the discovery of a greenstone bowl at Inanna's temple in Nippur. The bowl features a depiction of a large feline battling a giant serpent, with inscriptions identifying the feline as representative of the goddess. During the Akkadian period, Ishtar was often portrayed as a fully armed goddess of war. Before launching a campaign, kings and generals would offer sacrifices to her, invoking her power to boost morale, crush enemies, and secure victory. Inanna is also the protector of fertility, sexuality, and sacred prostitution. One of her most important roles was the annual sacred marriage ritual with the city-state king. This ceremony was likely performed between the king and a sacred prostitute from Inanna's temple. Uruk's three great heroes, Enmerkar, Lugalbanda, and Gilgamesh, were all described as brides of Inanna, and their marriages to the goddess were pivotal events in their respective stories. In fact, when Gilgamesh rejected Inanna's advances, he set in motion the death of his companion Enkidu and his own obsession with seeking immortality. Enkidu hurling a bull's leg at Inanna's face was a secondary consequence. However, this role of bridegroom was shared by all kings of Sumerian city-states. Each new year, the ruler had to marry Inanna to reaffirm his authority and secure her favor for the coming year. The occasion also served as a grand public celebration. During the ritual, the king temporarily assumed divine status as Inanna's husband. Poetic hymns celebrated the symbolic marriage, with Inanna's high priestess representing the goddess and the king acting as her spouse. These myths together created a complex image of Inanna, a goddess who was revered, power-hungry, capricious, and bloodthirsty. To men, she was a dangerous seductress. Unlike other high-ranking Sumerian goddesses, such as Enlil's consort Ninlil or Enki's consort Ninhursag, who bore the responsibilities of wife and mother, Inanna remained an unmarried maiden, oscillating between quietness and wild abandon. Inanna is sometimes described as the custodian of the divine laws, or Me, the universal decrees of the cosmos. The most complete extant list of the Me enumerates about 100 attributes, some of which are difficult to interpret. These include roles like king, priest, deity, elder, and professions such as scribes, shepherds, blacksmiths, and leather workers. The list also covers critical human activities, qualities, moral values, and emotions. Additionally, laws, music, arts, judgment, wisdom, truth, falsehood, sexuality, sacred prostitution, city destruction, mourning, and joy are all included. These principles were considered fundamental elements of behavior and consciousness, defining human existence. Some abstract concepts were tied to material symbols. For example, a drum embodied rhythm, while a throne symbolized kingship. Owning the Me conferred great power, but also significant responsibility. One version of the myth says that the Me was bestowed by high-ranking male gods like An or Enlil, while another claims they were entrusted to Enki, who safeguarded them in his temple in Eridu. When a god was assigned a duty, Enki would transfer the corresponding Me. However, the Me had no inherent defense mechanisms, leaving them vulnerable to theft. In the epic Enki and Ninhursag, after recovering from his illness, Enki distributed riches, livestock, precious metals, and abundant crops to regions like Magan, Dilmun, and Meluha. He also created fertile lands, livestock, grain, and the technologies of building and weaving, assigning each domain to a specific deity. However, Inanna, feeling overlooked, visited Eridu to confront Enki. In this version of the myth, Inanna is portrayed as Enki's daughter. She complained about her lack of power, pointing out that other deities, such as Nintu, the goddess of childbirth, Nisaba, the goddess of grain and writing, and Nansha, the goddess of fishing, had their own domains. I am the holy Inanna. Where are my divine powers and domain? Enki warmly welcomed his daughter, showering her with wine and listing her many existing roles, reminding her that her domain extended beyond herding to encompass war, death, funerals, and burial rites. With each responsibility, he added, "Young Inanna, what more can we grant you?" Enki concluded by saying, "Inanna, what is indestructible, you have the power to destroy. What cannot be built, you have the power to create." Still dissatisfied, Inanna plotted to steal the Mi and bring them back to her sacred city of Uruk. She flattered Enki during a drinking session, praising his generosity and hinting at her desire to safeguard the Mi. Enki, increasingly intoxicated, eventually offered to transfer the Mi to her. He instructed his steward to hand them over, and once Inanna had secured all the Mi, she loaded them onto her celestial boat and departed for Uruk. Upon sobering up, Enki realized the Mi were missing and questioned his steward, who reminded him that he had personally handed them over to Inanna. Enraged, Enki ordered his followers to retrieve the Mi. On her journey home, Inanna faced 6 challenges, each time being confronted by a creature from Enki's watery domain. The first was a small frog, followed by various aquatic creatures attempting to stop her. Inanna remained steadfast, reminding the pursuers that Enki himself had sworn to grant her the Mi. She also summoned her loyal servant Ninshubur, who came rushing from Uruk's temple, chanting a protective incantation to counteract the waters of the Abzu. With Ninshubur's help, Inanna safely returned to Uruk, triumphantly unloading the Mi and securing her place as the most powerful goddess. During a celebratory feast, she prophesied Uruk's glorious future. Though the myth ends ambiguously regarding Enki, it appears he and Inanna reconciled. Inanna also took over the Inanna temple in Uruk from An, becoming its principal deity alongside her twin brother, the sun god Utu. Together, they acted as enforcers of divine justice. Inanna ascended to the heavens, riding 7 mighty beasts, more precisely, 7 lions. Even the Anunnaki gods bowed before her, and An, filled with fear, eventually ceded the role of Uruk's royal protector and the sacred Inanna temple to her. From that point on, the gods prostrated themselves before Inanna. Inanna's descent into the underworld. One of Inanna's most famous myths describes her journey to the underworld, ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. Inanna sought to expand her domain by claiming the underworld, but was ultimately defeated and humiliated by her sister. The story begins with Inanna donning her finest jewelry and adorning herself with the 7 Mi she had seized from Enki. She set out for the underworld to challenge her sister for dominion. Before leaving, she instructed her servant Ninshubur, "If I do not return within 3 days, sound the mourning drum and sing a lament for me. Seek help first from Enlil, then Nana, and finally Enki, who knows the life-giving herbs and waters to revive the dead." Arriving at the gates of the underworld, Inanna demanded entry. "Gatekeeper, open your gate for me. Open the gate and let me in. If you do not open the gate, I shall break it down, smash its bars, shatter its posts, and uproot its foundations. I shall raise the dead to devour the living. The dead will outnumber the living." Ereshkigal's steward, Namtar, sensed the gravity of the situation, but dared not offend An's favorite daughter, Inanna. Politely, he asked her purpose for descending to the underworld. Inanna claimed she was there to attend the funeral of her brother-in-law, Gugalana. Namtar relayed her words to Ereshkigal, who became deeply uneasy and bit her lip, saying, "Let her enter, but ensure that the 7 gates of the road of no return are shut tightly behind her, and strip her of her protective charms. At each gate, Namtar removed one of Inanna's ornaments or garments, explaining that this was the law of the underworld, which was completely different from the laws of the world above. By the time Inanna passed the last gate, she was stripped of all her possessions and stood naked before Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal stepped down from her throne, and Inanna attempted to seize it. However, her reckless bid for power immediately failed. The 7 judges of the underworld fixed their piercing gaze upon her, turning her into a lifeless corpse. Ereshkigal then ordered that her body be hung on a hook. On the surface world, 3 days had passed, and Inanna's servant, Ninshubur, growing uneasy, followed her mistress's instructions. She went to Enlil's temple in Nippur to plead for help. The temperamental god exploded with anger, exclaiming, "Inanna already wields such great power, yet she was still unsatisfied and sought dominion over the underworld. Since she has accepted the laws of the underworld, let her remain there." Faithful Ninshubur then went to the moon god Nanna's temple in Ur, but was similarly rebuffed. Finally, she made her way to Enki's temple in Eridu. Although Enki complained that he was tired of Inanna's foolish escapades, he still took steps to resolve the matter. Scraping some dirt from beneath his fingernails, he created 2 asexual beings capable of entering and exiting the underworld without punishment. He gave them the water and food of life, and instructed them, "Sneak into the underworld quietly, slipping through the gate hinges like flies. You will find Ereshkigal in labor. Each time she cries out in pain, echo her cries. She will be grateful for your sympathy and offer to reward you. No matter if she offers you a whole river of water or an entire field of grain, refuse. Instead, ask only for the corpse of Inanna." Following these instructions, the 2 asexual beings infiltrated the underworld and used the life-giving water and food to revive Inanna. Together, the 3 fled toward safety. But as they neared the surface, the 7 judges of the underworld caught up to Inanna, saying, "Who has ever escaped the underworld alive?" They insisted that if she wished to leave, she must provide a substitute to take her place. To ensure she kept her word, they sent a group of underworld demons to accompany her back to the land of the living. The first person they encountered was Inanna's servant Ninshubur, who was dressed in mourning and weeping on the ground. Inanna could not bear to condemn her loyal servant to the underworld, and moved on to search for another substitute. Next, they came across Shara, the god of Umma, who was also weeping. As he was Inanna's singer, hairstylist, and manicurist, she could not bring herself to sacrifice him either. Finally, on the plains of Kulaba, Inanna discovered her husband, the shepherd god Dumuzi, not mourning her death, but attending a lavish banquet in full ceremonial dress. Furious, she exclaimed, "I suffered torment in the underworld. My authority was challenged, my beauty ravaged, and my body reduced to skin and bones. Meanwhile, my husband feasts and enjoys himself." She immediately chose Dumuzi as her substitute. Terrified, Dumuzi fled and pleaded with Utu, Inanna's brother, to transform him into a snake to escape the demons. However, the disguise only lasted 6 months before he was captured. Later, Inanna appeared to regret her decision and arranged for Dumuzi's sister, Geshtinanna, to take his place in the underworld for 6 months each year, allowing him to return to the surface during that time. The Babylonians adopted this Sumerian myth, and in their Akkadian version, the story was simplified. Inanna became known as Ishtar, and her motivation for descending to the underworld remained her desire to seize her sister's realm. At the gate, her behavior was similarly aggressive, but this version included even more chilling threats. The story describes Ereshkigal's reaction to Ishtar's approach. Her face turned pale, as though felled by a tamarisk. Her lips turned black, like bruised reeds. As in the Sumerian version, Ishtar passed through 7 gates and was stripped of her ornaments, with the gatekeeper explaining that it was customary in the underworld. However, this time, instead of being condemned by the judges, Ishtar was struck down by 60 diseases sent by Ereshkigal, who hung her body on a hook to serve as a water skin. Meanwhile, the surface world fell into chaos. Without Ishtar, the goddess of love and fertility, a curse descended upon the world, halting all procreation among animals, plants, and humans. In response, the gods organized a rescue mission. Enki devised a plan, creating a handsome young man to charm Ereshkigal. The man's beauty delighted Ereshkigal, who, in her gratitude, offered him anything he desired. Following Enki's instructions, the man requested the water skin that was Ishtar's body. Ereshkigal was furious, exclaiming, "You have asked for what you should not have asked." Yet she could not go back on her word. Although she cursed the man to a life of poverty and servitude, she released Ishtar, who regained her ornaments and divine status as she passed back through the 7 gates. In one version, Tammuz, Akkadian for Dumuzi, is killed during an attack by underworld demons who invade his tent, smashing furniture, spilling milk, and slaying him. Ishtar, seeking revenge, killed the demons and ventured into the underworld to retrieve her lover. In this rendition, Ishtar loses her divine attributes as she descends through the 7 gates, but is ultimately revived by the queen of the underworld, who grants her the water of life. Once resurrected, Ishtar sprinkles the water of life over Tammuz's body. The story ends. May the silence awaken, and together we shall savor the scent of rebirth. In the previous section, we mentioned that in the myth of Inanna's descent to the underworld, the shepherd god Dumuzi was handed over as a substitute to the underworld demons by the Queen of Heaven, Inana, resulting in his demise. However, in another version, Dumuzi's death stems from a foreboding dream he had that predicted his own demise, after which he was pursued and killed by underworld demons. The Death of Dumuzi. For several days, the shepherd god Dumuzi dreamt of being consumed by the underworld. Restless and filled with unease, he sensed his end was near. With tears in his eyes, he wandered aimlessly across familiar plains, unable to dispel the sorrow weighing on his heart. His beloved shepherd's flute hung around his neck, yet he had no desire to play it. Facing the wilderness, he called out, imploring his cherished flocks to lament for him. "Herds of cattle, dear lambs, cry for me. Gurgling streams, croaking frogs, mourn for me. If I die, who will care for my mother, left with only a few loaves of bread? Who will comfort my sister, alone and desolate? O plains, O creatures of the wild, weep for me, as my mother weeps for me, as my sister weeps for me." A sinister premonition loomed over him, and his heart felt heavy. Though he fought to stay alert, the pull of sleep eventually overcame him. In his slumber, he had a terrifying vision. Countless fireflies swarmed around him, their emerald green lights flitting and shifting. His skin seemed to flow as though his soul were leaking out of his body. The fireflies grew larger, reaching the size of hawks, before suddenly dispersing. The scene then shifted to a reed marsh. One reed bowed low before him, while 2 stood upright side by side, until one abruptly snapped. The dream shifted again to a gloomy, shadowed house where his sacred flame was extinguished with cold water, and his cooking pot fell as its stand was pulled away, shattering on the floor. Finally, the scene moved to his sister's sheepfold, where his holy shepherd's staff disappeared, and vicious owls stormed into the pen, spilling milk, ripping water skins from the walls, and overturning his sheep milk cauldron. Hawks swooped down to snatch lambs, frightening the flock into a cacophony of bleats. Trembling in a corner, Dumuzi was dragged away by the owls and hawks. Unable to bear the burden of his dreams any longer, Dumuzi sought out his sister, Inana, a skilled interpreter of dreams. Upon hearing his account, Inana was alarmed and revealed that his dream foretold the worst, his death. She explained that the ominous fireflies and predatory owls symbolized the onslaught of underworld demons, and the two reeds standing upright symbolized the siblings themselves, one of whom was destined to perish. The bowing reed represented their mother, mourning her child's fate. Inana added that the demons, called the Gula, were fearsome shadows who neither consumed clean water or bread, nor drank beer or ate roasted meat. They cared nothing for love or familial ties and were formidable adversaries to face. Heeding his sister's advice, Dumuzi went into hiding, asking her to act as a lookout on a high platform and alert him at the first sign of danger. He instructed her, "I will hide in the grass, in the trenches. Keep my whereabouts secret, and tell no one where I am." To deceive the demons, Dumuzi urged her to tear her clothes, dishevel her hair, beat her chest, discard her jewelry, and cover herself with dust to appear utterly grief-stricken. Inana followed his instructions and swore never to betray him. The Gula soon emerged from the underworld and confronted Inana, offering her vast fertile lands and, later, a sweet-water river complete with dams and irrigation canals, promising endless abundance. Inana, however, stood firm and refused to be bribed. Disheartened, the Gula sighed. Who under the sun has ever seen a sister betray her brother? They then shifted tactics and sought out one of Dumuzi's friends, who revealed several possible hiding places. Acting on this information, the Gula located Dumuzi. In despair, Dumuzi raised his hands to the heavens, pleading with his brother-in-law, the sun god Utu, to transform him into a gazelle to escape. Utu granted his wish, allowing Dumuzi to bound away, but the Gula quickly resumed their pursuit. Once again, Dumuzi called on Utu for help, and was sent to the home of an old woman named Belili, whom he trusted. Belili offered Dumuzi food and water, as he was exhausted and starving. Yet, before he could finish his meal, the Gula stormed into the house. Although Belili tried to hide him, the demons soon discovered his presence. Dumuzi prayed to Utu once more, who directed him to his sister's sheepfold. Inana, seeing her brother approach, began wailing loudly, tearing her clothes, beating her chest, and covering herself in dust to deceive the Gula. Despite her efforts, the Gula saw through her ruse. They searched the sheepfold thoroughly, eventually finding Dumuzi. The demons acted out his dream. They snatched his shepherd's staff, spilled the milk bucket, tore down the water skin, and extinguished the flame, before finally dragging Dumuzi away and killing him. Devastated, Inana mourned her brother, declaring that he could not remain dead. She offered to take his place, prompting the queen of the underworld to agree to a compromise. Dumuzi and Inana would alternate their time in the underworld. Every autumn, Dumuzi would die, descending to the underworld, while every spring he would return to the surface, anointed with the water of life, ensuring the fertility of livestock. During his time in the underworld, Inana would take his place. The concept of a god dying in autumn and resurrecting in spring was deeply ingrained in Mesopotamian beliefs. Another deity, Dumu, meaning child, shares a similar myth. Dumu, the son of the goddess Dutur, and possibly the water god Enki, was the patron deity of the fruit-laden orchards of Girsu. As a vegetation god, Dumu represented the sap flowing in trees and plants during spring. In autumn, when Dumu disappeared beneath his sacred cedar tree, his followers would lament and search for him until his return in spring. Eventually, the worship of Damu merged with that of Dumuzi. A hymn begins with Inana mourning her husband. Shepherd Dumuzi, god of the mountains, Inana's bridegroom, god of the Arali, my tamarisk tree, never drawing water from the orchard, its branches bare in the desert. Dutur, the divine mother, prepares a meal and brews beer, calling her young son to return. Dumuzi Damu, now a ghost, weeps because he cannot answer her call. His blood, or its plant symbol, is found, and followers encourage the goddess to use it to brew beer, to revive her son. Eventually, Dumuzi Damu returns, restoring life to vegetation and animals. The worship of Dumuzi Damu passed to the Assyrians and Babylonians, who called this deity Tammuz, reverently addressing him as Adon, my lord or ruler. Tammuz's myths evolved, with some claiming he was born from a myrrh tree and killed by a boar. His wounds bled like a pomegranate's vivid red, and where his blood fell, flowers grew. These flowers, delicate and fleeting, were known as windflowers or anemones. These myths also specify how the funeral and resurrection ceremonies for Tammuz should be conducted. Every midsummer, during the month named after Tammuz, festivals were held to commemorate his death. Women would wail and mourn the god's passing. Tammuz's sister sang lamentations for his death and declared that a resurrection ceremony would be held after half a year, when Tammuz would return from the underworld. The young god would be washed with pure water, anointed with fragrant oils, and dressed in red garments. He would play the flute, and sacred courtesans would arouse his desire, bringing new life to the earth in the spring. The worship rituals for Tammuz first spread throughout Mesopotamia and later to Phoenicia, Canaan, and other regions. According to the British scholar Frazer, around the 7th century BCE, Tammuz's myth was introduced to Greece. During its transmission, the Greeks misunderstood the title Adon, my lord, as Tammuz's name, transliterated it into Greek, and thus created the figure of Adonis, the tragically short-lived beautiful youth. It is said that Adonis was born from a myrrh tree. His mother, a Cypriot princess named Myrrha, was both his mother and his sister. Due to a curse from Aphrodite, Myrrha committed incest with her father, Cinyras. When Cinyras discovered his daughter was pregnant, he pursued her with a sword. By then, Aphrodite had regretted her curse on the young woman and transformed Myrrha into a myrrh tree. After 10 months, the tree split open, and a beautiful baby emerged, who grew into a handsome youth admired by all. Many gods competed for Adonis, but Aphrodite and Persephone, queen of the underworld, eventually claimed him. The rivalry between these two goddesses of love and death reached Zeus, who intervened to settle the dispute. Zeus decreed that Adonis would spend half the year with Persephone and the other half with Aphrodite. However, Adonis and Aphrodite fell in love, and a jealous Persephone informed Ares, Aphrodite's chief lover, of their affair. Consumed by jealousy, Ares released a wild boar, which fatally gored Adonis while he was hunting. His blood stained the valley red, and soon a crimson flower, the anemone, bloomed where the blood fell. as Aphrodite rushed to her wounded lover, she stepped on a thorny bush of white roses, and her divine blood forever stained the roses red. Finally, at Aphrodite's request, Zeus resurrected Adonis. From that point onward, Adonis would die in the valleys each year but return to life in the spring to reunite with Aphrodite. Because of his connection to the two goddesses of love and death, Adonis, like his predecessor Damu, became a symbol of the cycle of vegetation's decay and renewal. He was regarded as a vegetation god. In Western Asia and Greece, midsummer festivals were held annually to commemorate his death. Women would mourn and lament for Adonis, and plant Adonis gardens to honor him. These gardens were small baskets or pots filled with soil in which wheat, barley, lettuce, and various flowers were sown and tended for 8 days. Under the sun's intense heat, the plants grew quickly, but, lacking roots, withered just as quickly. At the end of the 8 days, the women would take the withered plants and Adonis effigies and cast them into the sea or streams, symbolizing the promotion of plant growth and fertility. The sun god Utu, Shamash. The sun god Utu was one of the most important deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Revered as early as 3500 BCE, Utu was celebrated in numerous hymns, inscriptions, symbols, and depictions. He was often portrayed as a benevolent elder with a long beard, his identity as the sun god marked by a halo of light around his head. Initially, Utu was believed to walk across the sky, but with the domestication of mules and horses, he gained a chariot pulled by splendid steeds. At times, he was depicted as a sun disk surrounded by a four-pointed star, with 3 wavy lines extending outward between each point to symbolize sunlight, warmth, and power. Each morning, Utu would rise from his magnificent palace in the Far East. After 2 attendant gods opened the gates of heaven for him, he would drive his radiant chariot across the sky to the distant west, where the entrance to the underworld lay at the foot of Mount Mashu. There, 2 more attendants would open the gates to admit the still glowing sun chariot. Utu would then cross a deadly sea, its waters lethal to any living being who touched it. In a comfortable cabin aboard a boat, sleeping through the night until he returned to his eastern palace at dawn. His wife, the dawn and fertility goddess Sherida, would wake him, and he would once again set off in his chariot. The sun's light brought clarity and warmth to the earth, fostering the growth of plants and crops. It also illuminated the hearts of humanity. As the sun illuminated the entire sky, Utu observed everything that occurred, even in the dark depths of the underworld. This omniscience made him the god of truth, judgment, and justice. Together with his 2 divine children, the goddess of justice Kittim and the god of order Misharu, Utu aided those in distress. The Akkadian-speaking Babylonians referred to Utu as the sun god Shamash and Sherida as Aya, emphasizing his role in bringing laws and justice to humanity. A famous depiction on the Hammurabi Code stele shows King Hammurabi standing before Shamash, receiving the scepter of kingship as a symbol of divine authority. Hammurabi, a wise and prudent ruler, understood that invoking Shamash to signify the divine origin and inviolability of kingship would add great weight to his laws. Although he could have chosen Babylon's patron deity Marduk or the well-known god of wisdom Ea, Shamash was a particularly apt choice, as his presence was manifest daily through the sun's rays. Utu was kind and generous, often helping humans and animals who prayed to him. The king of Kish, Etana, who was childless, prayed daily to the sun god, asking him to reveal where to find the herb of fertility. Meanwhile, an eagle, punished for devouring the snake's offspring during a dispute over a poplar tree, had fallen into a trap and was gravely injured. It too pleaded for the sun god's assistance. Utu instructed Inanna to climb over the high mountains to find the eagle, who would then carry him to the heavens to seek the goddess of fertility. Inanna found the eagle, nursed it back to health, and the grateful eagle agreed to take him to the celestial realm. After many trials, Inanna achieved his goal. Utu had a twin sister, the goddess Inana, with whom he shared a close bond. In fact, it was Utu who introduced Inana to her husband, the shepherd god Dumuzi. At the time, Inana had reached marriageable age and had many suitors. Among them, two gods stood out as the strongest candidates. This story is portrayed in a short poetic drama featuring a four-person dialogue. The Marriage of Inana and Dumuzi. Inana had grown into a beautiful young woman, and Utu affectionately said to his sister, "Queen of heaven, the flax planted has matured, and the barley on the ridges is fragrant. My sister, you should consider marriage. The joy of the best flax and barley is floating in the air. Let me bring you the flax and barley. Let me bring you the king of shepherds." Inanna did not directly respond, but asked her brother who would harvest the flax, comb the fibers, spin it into thread, weave it into cloth, and dye it. Utu avoided a direct answer and repeatedly assured her that someone would do these tasks for her. Finally, Inanna asked outright, "After the dyed linen is cut and made into bed sheets, who will share the bed with me?" Utu then revealed his recommendation, the shepherd god Dumuzi. Inanna was unimpressed, as she preferred the agricultural god Enkidu. She protested, saying her heart was set on the hard-working farmer who wielded the plow, listing Enkidu's virtues. He can bundle wheat so neatly, pile sheaves on the threshing floor, and fill the granary with golden grain. By contrast, she said, that shepherd god can only fill the sheepfold with sheep. Seeing the conversation going in the wrong direction, Utu quickly began praising Dumuzi's elegance and wealth, highlighting his many talents and abundant resources. With his skillful hands, he plays the melodious shepherd's flute, bringing vitality to the land. He prepares sweet butter and cheese, delicious milk and roasted meat daily. He strengthens kings and enriches shepherds. Then he asked, "My sister, I don't understand why you dislike him." Inanna countered, saying she would never wear the rough garments of a shepherd, no matter how fine his wool was. She declared, "I only want to marry the farmer, to plant barley and beans together." With no other option, Utu conveyed his sister's rejection to Dumuzi. Dumuzi, however, refused to accept this and insisted that Inanna simply did not understand his merits. He approached her directly, enumerating his advantages and arguing that he was wealthier than Enkidu. He claimed that his butter and cheese were far superior to the farmer's bread and grain cakes. His milk and yogurt rivaled the farmer's date, wine, and beer, and his fine woolen blankets were softer and warmer than linen. Moreover, he emphasized his artistic flair, boasting of his ability to play the shepherd's flute, whose enchanting music delighted all the cattle and sheep on the plains. Eventually, through Utu and Dumuzi's persuasion, and seeing Dumuzi's handsome appearance, Inanna changed her mind and agreed to marry the shepherd god. Later, when their relationship broke down and Dumuzi was handed over to the underworld demons, the Gula judges, by Inanna, it was Utu who helped Dumuzi escape. Utu transformed Dumuzi into a snake, enabling him to flee to his sister's sanctuary and temporarily evade the demons. Inanna trusted her brother Utu deeply, though Utu did not always fulfill her requests. At one point, Inanna transplanted a young hulupu tree, possibly a tamarisk, into her protected city of Uruk, intending to use it to craft a throne and bed once it matured. The tree, thought to aid in rain rituals, was watered nightly by Inana. However, when it was near full growth, a serpent nested at its roots, a zoo bird built a nest in its branches, and a demon named Lilitu settled in its trunk. Troubled by these unwelcome intruders, Inanna was sleepless and distressed, unsure of how to drive them away. At dawn, Utu began his daily journey across the sky. Inanna stopped him, sharing her troubles and asking for help. Utu refused, citing his duty to continue his celestial journey and dismissing the problem as minor. Disheartened, Inanna turned to Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. Upon hearing of the goddess's plight, Gilgamesh hurried to her aid. Donning heavy armor and wielding a mighty axe, he slew the serpent with one blow. The zoo bird fled with its chicks, and Lilitu, outnumbered, retreated to the desert. After driving away the monsters, Gilgamesh felled the hulupu tree and presented the timber to Inanna for her throne and bed. Grateful, Inanna used the tree to craft a sacred drum and drumstick, which she gifted to Gilgamesh as a token of thanks. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh later misused these sacred items during war and accidentally dropped them into the underworld. To retrieve them, his companion Enkidu volunteered to venture into the underworld, but violated many taboos, becoming trapped. Gilgamesh, fearing for his friend, sought help first from Enlil in Nippur and then from Enki in Eridu. Enki sympathized and instructed the sun god Utu to create an opening between the living and the dead, allowing Enkidu's spirit to escape briefly. Thanks to Utu's intervention, the veil between life and death was lifted, granting the two friends one last conversation. This myth underscores Utu Shamash's ability to reach the underworld and interact with the spirits of the deceased. Like his father, the moon god Nana, Utu Shamash later became a bridge between the living and the dead. In later periods, as the concept of soul judgment emerged, it was believed that Utu Shamash entered the underworld at dusk to judge the souls of the dead. A favorable judgment allowed the soul to enjoy eternal bliss. Around 2006 BCE, the third dynasty of Ur faced internal rebellion and external enemies, compounded by natural disasters like torrential rain and great fires. Amidst this turmoil, the city of Ur fell. In the oldest known lament, the lament for the destruction of Ur, the city's patron goddess, Ningal, the consort of Nana, made a final effort to save it. She knelt before An and Enlil, extending her hands and weeping as she pleaded, "Do not destroy my city. Do not destroy Ur." Despite repeatedly crying out to the chief gods, recounting past peace and happiness, An and Enlil remained unmoved. Then, an unprecedented, blinding storm swept through the skies and roared across the earth. Torrential rain, like a broken dam, consumed the city in a deluge. The gods summoned the fire god Gibil, who ignited flames before the storm, turning the desert into a blazing inferno as bright as midday sun. The sunlight, which once illuminated the day, dimmed in comparison to the destructive storm that shook the earth and instilled fear in all living things. Death was everywhere. People groaned in pain, and the city was reduced to ruins. Corpses lay scattered like debris across the wilderness. Beneath the once grand city gates, bodies were strewn. Festival roads were piled high with the dead, and plazas once filled with dancers were now heaps of lifeless bodies. Blood flowed in torrents, filling every ditch and hollow. Corpses melted like butter under the sun. Both the weak and the strong starved to death. The elderly who could not leave their homes perished in the fire. Sleeping infants were swept away like fish by floodwaters. Those killed by battle axes had no helmets. Those slain by spears were defenseless. the invaders showed no regard for Ningal or Nana's people, treating the once beautiful homeland as worthless. Watching her city's devastation, the goddess wept. "The storm has destroyed my city. My home has become someone else's." Nana also sought help from his father, Enlil. "Father who gave me life, what has my city done to you that you abandoned it? The crescent boat can no longer bring first fruits to you, nor deliver bread and cheese to Nippur." Enlil, however, replied that the decisions of An and Enlil could not be changed. Ur was indeed granted kingship, but it was not given an everlasting throne. Its reign has come to an end. With the destruction of Ur, Nana's position in the pantheon gradually diminished. In later myths, he was even described as the son of the newer god-king, Marduk. In ancient times, it was believed that lunar eclipses occurred when demons tried to steal the moonlight, and Nana had to battle these demons to restore natural order. However, as Nana's stature declined, this duty was transferred to Marduk. The warrior king Ninurta. Ninurta was a pivotal figure in Mesopotamian mythology, with the number of myths about him second only to those of the goddess Inana. Initially, his domains were diverse, encompassing agriculture, irrigation, hunting, law, writing, and warfare. However, as conflicts increased in Mesopotamia, Ninurta's role as a war god became more prominent. The Assyrians, who glorified military might, particularly venerated Ninurta. King Ashur-nasirpal II of Assyria built a massive temple for him, relocating Ninurta's worship center from the Sumerian city of Nippur to Kalhu, modern-day Nimrud. Ninurta was often depicted as a valiant warrior armed with a bow and arrows, sometimes with wings, standing atop a ferocious creature with the body of a lion and the tail of a scorpion. He wielded a magical mace called Sharur, literally smasher of multitudes, which could speak, move on its own, converse with the gods, scout enemy positions, and relay messages. In one instance, Sharur returned with news that boulders and plants in the mountains had risen up to attack the plains. This tale is recounted in the epic Lugali, a hymn celebrating Ninurta's battle against the stone monster Azag and the victory over the stone creatures that supported it. Defeating the stone monster Azag. The epic begins with Ninurta feasting and drinking with the gods in the Ikor temple in Nippur. Suddenly, Sharur brought troubling news. The stones and plants in the mountains have elected a fearsome warrior named Azag as their leader, and they are attacking the plains. Azag, said to be the offspring of the sky god An and the earth goddess Kai, was immensely hard and impervious to ordinary weapons. To propagate its kind across the Mesopotamian plains, Azag continually mated with mountains, spawning countless stones. Now, roused by Azag, these stones were rolling down the mountains and crushing the cities below. Sharur warned Ninurta that this foe was unlike any he had faced before. Azag has already taken control of the northeastern cities in the Elamite Mountains and threatens to seize your power and throne. This relief fragment depicts Ninurta using his bow to slay the bird monster Anzu. The news disrupted the festivities, alarming the gods, who suddenly found their wine unpalatable. Ninurta prepared to set out for battle, clearing his path with storms and fire. He leveled hills, burned forests, shot down birds in the sky, boiled fish in rivers, and crushed the enemy's vanguard like insects. Sharur, returning from reconnaissance, warned Ninurta of the imminent confrontation with Azag, emphasizing that this opponent was unlike any he had faced before. Do not recklessly charge into the mountains with your troops. Without allies, you cannot defeat Azag. However, Ninurta disregarded Sharur's advice and led his forces into the mountains. In the ensuing battle, Azag unleashed unprecedented destruction. It howled like a rabid dog, hissed like a venomous serpent, and slithered like a giant python. It hurled stones like a torrential rain, collapsing upon Ninurta like a wall. It dried up mountain streams, uprooted trees, tore the earth's flesh, and carved deep trenches. It ignited reed beds, turning the sky blood-red. In that moment, fields were covered in ash, stretching to the horizon. Faced with such a powerful adversary, Ninurta retreated. He fled faster than a bird in flight. Seeing their proud son's defeat, Enlil groaned in despair, hiding in a corner of the temple. The Anunnaki gods cowered and huddled together like frightened doves. Meanwhile, Sharur flew to seek advice from the wise water god Enki, or, in some versions, Enlil. Enki suggested that Ninurta attack Azag with relentless torrential rains, seize its shoulders, and thrust a spear into its liver. Bolstered by this strategy, Ninurta regained his courage. Wielding Sharur, he unleashed storm after storm upon Azag, subduing it like relentless ocean waves. He then pierced Azag's liver with his spear and cunningly destroyed its reproductive organs to ensure it could no longer threaten the land. Victorious, Ninurta washed the blood from his belt and mace, wiped his brow, and sang a song of triumph over Azag's corpse before returning gloriously to Sumer. Following his victory, Ninurta began repurposing various mountain stones for human benefit. The tablets describe, "In the past, the good waters of the mountains did not flow toward the plains, but ran uncontrolled, frequently destroying fields and causing famine among the people. At that time, humanity did not know how to build canals to direct the waters of the Tigris River. Ninurta decided to use the stones he had conquered to address this issue. He organized people to construct stone dams to contain raging floods and to build canals to channel scattered mountain lakes toward the plains for irrigating barley fields and orchards. This grand irrigation project took an extended period, leaving Ninurta unable to visit his mother, Ninhursag, formerly Ninmah. His mother missed him deeply, lamenting the insurmountable mountains that separated them and complaining that her son was so preoccupied with his work that he had no time to visit her, forcing her to come to him. Hearing her lament, Ninurta gazed lovingly at his mother and pledged to dedicate the conquered mountains to her. "From now on, I will let the meadows provide herbs for you. Let the hills yield honeyed wine for you. Let the forests grow cedar, cypress, juniper, and calamus for you. The hills will bring you sweet fruits, sacred perfumes, and abundant livestock. The rocks will smelt copper and tin, sift gold and silver, and present them as offerings to you." Ninurta also asked his mother to change her name to Ninhursag, meaning Queen of the Mountains. Ninurta then undertook the task of analyzing each type of stone and assigning specific uses to them. For those stones that had joined the rebellion or opposed him during the battle, he decreed severe punishments. For example, corundum, which obstructed his path deep in the mountains, was condemned to be used as a grinding tool for crushing other stones. Granite and basalt, which had formed the defensive walls against him, were assigned to be molds for goldsmiths. Malachite, which had attacked his weapons, was sentenced to be burned in blazing fire. Limestone, which had conspired to seize Ninurta's throne, was relegated to serve as the foundation for muddy terrain and was destined to dissolve quickly in water. Deceptive flint was punished to shatter easily when struck by a bull's horn and to be fragmented by a blacksmith's chisel. Numerous other stones were similarly punished. However, stones that had supported Ninurta, or refrained from opposing him during the battle, were rewarded accordingly. For instance, gypsum, which switched sides to support him, was rewarded by being turned into seals. Diorite, which had backed Ninurta, was honored with the privilege of becoming a massive statue in his temple. Lapis lazuli and other precious stones, which did not offend Ninurta, were given prestigious roles as sought-after gemstones. Thus, through Ninurta's efforts, humanity came to understand the uses of various stones and transported them from the mountains to Mesopotamian cities for everyday use. Ninurta's immense popularity and prestige among the gods not only stemmed from his battle against Azag, but also from his triumph over the fearsome bird monster Anzu, during which he recovered the Tablet of Destinies, the key to divine power and authority. This myth is recorded in a Sumerian epic, although only fragments survive. Alongside Anzu, Ninurta, and the wise water god Enki, a giant turtle plays a significant role. For the gods, the Tablet of Destinies was directly tied to their power and fate. Possessing the tablet meant wielding immense authority, but also bearing heavy responsibility. The tablet was typically under the control of the high god Enlil, although some accounts say it was entrusted to Enki in his watery temple of Eridu. The tablet itself lacked any defensive power, creating an opportunity for the bird monster Anzu to steal it. Anzu was no ordinary bird. It had the head of a lion and a massive body. Its roar could shake the earth, terrifying bulls into hiding in hills and horses into fleeing to mountains. It was an immensely powerful creature. This time, Anzu seized the chance to steal the Tablet of Destinies while Enki was off guard. What efforts Enki made to recover the tablet are missing from the surviving texts, but we know that eventually Ninurta entered the scene and struck Anzu. Anzu told Ninurta that by striking him, the tablet's divine power had returned to Enki in the Apsu, the primeval abyss. Ninurta lamented the loss of this power and authority, as well as his inability to achieve the prestige of Enki. Taking advantage of this moment, Anzu tried to persuade Ninurta to confront Enki and seize power. However, the cunning Enki had already anticipated Ninurta's intentions. Enki commanded the Apsu to rise in a great flood as a warning and sent his emissary Isimu to confront Ninurta. Ninurta, consumed by arrogance, struck Isimu during their argument, slapping him across the face. This act of disrespect exceeded Enki's tolerance. In his anger, Enki molded a massive turtle from the clay of the Apsu, imbued it with life, and commanded it to dig a deep pit with its 4 limbs. As Ninurta aggressively approached Enki, the wise god feigned retreat, luring Ninurta toward the pit. When Ninurta reached the edge, the giant turtle leapt from behind Enki, grabbing Ninurta and pushing him into the trap. Trapped in the pit, Ninurta struggled for a long time, unable to escape. During this time, Enki stood at the edge, mocking him mercilessly. "You arrogant, ambitious fool! Did you think you could kill me? You've conquered mountains and stones, but now you can't even climb out of a pit dug by a turtle. What kind of hero are you?" Hearing her son's cries for help, Ninurta's mother rushed to his rescue. She confronted Enki, accusing him of ingratitude and reminding him that she had once saved his life when he fell ill after eating the 8 plants. "You grass-eating fool! I saved you in the past. Now you must save my son." Enki finally relented and pulled the hapless Ninurta out of the pit. In later Akkadian versions, this myth was further developed. Anzu's combat prowess was amplified, and the god's fear of him was emphasized, making Ninurta's eventual victory appear even more glorious. The most complete surviving versions are Babylonian, so the deities' names below are in their Babylonian forms. During a journey, the storm god Enlil and the water god Ea, equivalent to Sumerian Enki, encountered the young Anzu. Ea observed that Anzu, born from the sacred waters of the Apsu, the soil of the vast earth, and the rocks of the great mountains, would grow into a powerful being. Ea suggested that Enlil take Anzu as a servant and raise him as a guard in Enlil's temple, Akur, in Nippur. Anzu grew into a massive griffin-like bird. Watching Enlil bathe in sacred waters, don his divine robe and crown, and take up the tablet of destinies to govern celestial and earthly affairs, Anzu's envy and ambition grew. One day, when Enlil removed his crown, robe, and the tablet of destinies and placed them on his throne to bathe, Anzu seized the tablet and fled to his mountain homeland. Akur was plunged into silence. Worship and rituals ceased, and Enlil himself was rendered inert. The gods convened, and the sky god Anu offered rewards to anyone who could defeat Anzu. Despite the promise of eternal glory, several gods, including the storm god Adad and Ishtar, refused out of fear. Finally, Ea proposed Ninurta as the champion. Ninurta's mother, Ninmah, persuaded him to accept the mission, instructing him to retrieve the tablet of destinies and immediately return it to Enlil. Empowered by his mother's guidance, Ninurta prepared to face Anzu, determined to restore order and reclaim the god's authority. Ninurta set off directly toward the peak where Anzu resided. Before even entering the mountain's depths, he spotted his enemy from afar, as the power held by Anzu caused his face to emit light, illuminating the dark mountains like daylight. With scorn, Anzu declared that he had seized everything from the gods, claiming that even the most renowned deities were no match for him. He mocked Ninurta, asking the young warrior to reconsider what he hoped to achieve by coming here. A fierce battle ensued, with the gods aiding Ninurta. The storm god Adad, in particular, brought deafening thunder that startled and frightened Anzu. Taking advantage of the distraction, Ninurta readied his bow and unleashed a volley of arrows at Anzu. However, armed with the Tablet of Destinies, Anzu chanted incantations that shattered the arrows mid-air. Ninurta suffered a humiliating defeat in the first round, retreating in disarray. Hearing of this, Ea quickly sent a messenger to advise Ninurta. He instructed him to direct strong winds toward Anzu's wings, followed by severing them with a spear. Make Anzu's feathers flutter like butterflies. Let his wings be torn apart by the wind and scattered. Seize his neck and cut off his head. Buoyed by this advice, Ninurta found renewed strength. Repeating his mother Ninhursag's instructions and following Ea's guidance, he tethered 7 malevolent winds to his chariot and charged toward Anzu. The sky darkened, the earth trembled, and the ferocious winds merged into a single force, striking Anzu with unrelenting power. The once mighty Anzu, stripped of his plumage, was reduced to a bald vulture. His massive wings were ripped away and scattered beyond recovery. Ninurta destroyed Anzu's lair, reclaimed the Tablet of Destinies, and triumphantly returned with Anzu's feathers. The agricultural god Dagon relayed the good news to the gods, recounting Ninurta's heroic deeds in detail. Ninurta was summoned to the gods' assembly, where Enlil fulfilled his promise, granting him a prestigious seat and authority among the divine council. In another version of the story, Enlil dispatched a messenger named Bertu to summon Ninurta to the gods' council. However, Ninurta refused to return the Tablet of Destinies to Enlil, desiring supreme power for himself. Although the details are unclear due to missing portions of the tablet, Ninurta ultimately returned the Tablet of Destinies to Enlil, securing an esteemed position and a stellar reputation for himself, becoming a highly revered male deity. The Goddess of Healing. Gula was the goddess of medicine in ancient Mesopotamian mythology, serving as the patron of physicians, healing, and pharmacology. She was also associated with the underworld and rebirth. In surviving ancient tablets and inscriptions, she is often depicted as a seated woman, adorned with stars on her head and accompanied by a dog, which symbolized her origins and served as her sacred animal. Gula's origins trace back to the Sumerian pantheon, with archaeological evidence of her worship dating as far back as the 3rd dynasty of Ur, circa 2047–1750 BCE, during the peak of Sumerian civilization. Initially known as Bau or Baba, she was considered the dog goddess. Observing that dogs licking their wounds seemed to hasten healing, people began associating dogs with recovery. Consequently, Bau, the dog goddess, transformed into the goddess of healing and medicine. The name Gula means great and is commonly interpreted as great healer. In Sumer, she was referred to as the great physician of the black-haired people, a term for the Sumerians, a revered deity who brought health and happiness. Gula was sometimes called Ninkarak, Lady of Karak, perhaps an early worship center for Bau, or Lady of the Walls, signifying her protective role in health. As her worship spread, she became known as Ninisina, Lady of Isin, a title reflecting her association with the city of Isin. Over time, her various names likely resulted from the merging of local healing goddesses. By the late Old Babylonian period, circa 2000 to 1600 BCE, her name was solidified as Gula, her most recognized designation today. Her principal worship center remained in Isin, but her veneration extended from Sumer to Akkad and eventually throughout Mesopotamia. In Babylonian mythology, Gula was considered a daughter of Anu, the sky god, one of the children he created at the dawn of existence. Accounts of her consorts vary, naming Ninurta, the divine judge Pabilsag, or the agricultural god Abu, as her husband. At least 2 of her consorts were associated with agriculture, symbolizing the medicinal use of plants. Gula's divine children. Gula had 2 sons and a daughter, Damu, Ninazu, and Gunura, all associated with healing. Damu was a principal Sumerian god of recovery. Damu can mend torn ligaments. He combined magic with scientific methods to cure diseases and frequently appeared alongside Gula in healing incantations. Gula served as the supreme deity of healing, while her power was channeled to physicians through Damu. Gunura possibly represented medicinal plants or health, while Ninazu was linked to snakes, the underworld, and recovery. Ninazu's symbol, a staff entwined with a serpent, is echoed in Egyptian depictions of Heka, the god of magic and medicine. It also influenced Hermes's caduceus and Asclepius's rod in Greek mythology. Today, the rod is an enduring emblem of medicine, associated with Hippocrates, the father of medicine, and recognized worldwide in medical institutions. Regardless of whether a disease was caused by gods, demons, or evil spirits, Gula was believed capable of restoring health. She was frequently invoked in prayers and inscriptions related to fertility, assisting with conception and childbirth. However, Gula was not always benevolent and compassionate. She was notoriously temperamental and was as often summoned in curses as in healing rituals. She was believed to bring earthquakes and storms when angered, earning titles like Queen of Storms and Lady who Makes Heaven Tremble. In ancient Mesopotamia, illness was often viewed as divine punishment or a warning from the gods. The gods, having created humans to labor on their behalf, were responsible for their care and welfare. However, humans were prone to sin, prompting the gods to use illness or suffering as reminders to guide them back to righteousness. While one deity might aim to heal a patient, another offended god might refuse offerings and hinder recovery. Illnesses could sometimes have supernatural causes, such as offending demons or the angry spirits of the dead, especially those who had died unnaturally or were not properly buried, like drowning victims or fallen soldiers. If proper offerings were not made to deceased relatives, their spirits could cause trouble for the living. Worse still, an innocent person might fall ill simply as collateral damage. Even when doctors correctly performed every spell and used the appropriate medicines, patients could still die. It is easy to imagine how important it was for people of that time to obtain the favor of the goddess of medicine, Gula. Her healing powers were deeply respected, as was the fear of her temper. She was called Healer of the Earth, Restorer of Wholeness, and Lady of Life Restoration. Gula brought vitality to the creatures created by the gods after the Great Flood, giving them life. She provided humanity with the means of healing and protected doctors who were equipped with impressive medical knowledge, guiding them in caring for the sick and appeasing both spirits and deities. To show their respect for Gula, kings erected commemorative steles in her honor. For example, one erected by Nebuchadnezzar bore the inscription, "If anyone defiles or removes this stele, may Ninurta, the king of heaven and earth, and Gula, the bride of Ashara, destroy his landmark and erase his lineage." During Hammurabi's reign, many goddesses lost prominence as male gods dominated the pantheon, but Gula continued to be worshipped and respected in the same way. She was called the planter of medicinal herbs, linking her to agriculture. People revered her for ensuring good harvests, fertility, and physical health. The worship of Gula persisted into the early Christian era. In the Near East, she was as popular as more widely known goddesses like Isis and Athena. However, as Christianity took deeper root, Gula's worship gradually declined. By the end of the first millennium CE, she was largely forgotten. Contrary to the stereotypical image of temples filled with smoke and constant prayer, ancient Mesopotamian temples were highly practical spaces. People visited frequently, not only to worship, but also because many aspects of daily life were under the purview of specific gods, and temples served as the hubs for related activities. Mesopotamian temples were akin to modern institutions, playing central roles in areas such as health, food processing, trade and loans, recreation, education, and other aspects of life. Archaeological evidence reveals that temples for various deities had significant importance in urban life. The temples of Gula often functioned as healing centers. Her priests treated patients using herbs, ointments, and spells. Archaeologists have even discovered tools resembling scalpels, indicating that priests or doctors may have performed rudimentary surgeries. People frequently offered sacrifices, prayers, and gifts in her temples, where Gula's sacred animal, the dog, roamed freely as her divine companion and was well cared for. Many hymns praising Gula call her Giver of Life or Great Healer, emphasizing her compassion and readiness to respond to cries of pain, attributes that may partly reflect the positive associations with her furry companion. Rituals in Gula's temples differed notably from those of other gods because dogs often participated in some capacity. Archaeologists have unearthed over 30 dog burials beneath the road leading to Gula's temple in the city of Isin. These dogs may have been sacrificed to transfer patients' illnesses onto them, or they might have been temple guard dogs buried with honor as protective spirits at the temple's entrance. In addition to real dogs, Gula's temples provided dog-shaped amulets, The most famous examples are the Nimrud dog terracotta figurines, discovered in the 1950s in the city of Nimrud. These clay dogs were inscribed with Gula's name and buried at temple entrances or thresholds to protect worshippers from harm. Similar figurines have been found in cities like Nineveh. Inscriptions on these figurines suggest they were believed to serve as potent amulets, protecting households from evil, just as real dogs did. This concludes Part 1 of Mesopotamian mythology.